Chapter 197. The dagger slightly changed its direction in midair, only grazing the black-clothed man's arm, leaving behind a shallow wound. Who do you think you are? You're just like someone I know. You're just as annoying as him. Too bad you managed to dodge it. I told you before that you'll regret it if you don't kill me. Are you sure you don't want to kill me now? The black-clothed man, Nick, covered the wound on his arm. After a glance, he knew that it wasn't a big deal. He then turned to look at Hei Wu with a bewildered expression. He asked hesitantly, "Why did you do this?" Black Merc sneered and said sarcastically, "Newbie, didn't you learn a lot from me? This is the last thing I'll teach you. Don't be careless unless you're sure your enemy is dead or has lost all ability to fight. Otherwise, you'll pay the price with your life." Nick nodded with a serious expression. "Thank you, I'll remember that. But that's not what I'm asking. You must have stabbed the dagger askew on purpose. Otherwise, my wound wouldn't be so light. Why did you do that?" Surprise appeared in Black Merc's eyes. He didn't expect Nick to ask this question. He couldn't help but smile disdainfully. "You're so naive. I didn't have enough strength, so I stabbed the dagger askew. Cut the crap. Are you going to kill me or not? This is your last chance." Nick shook his head with a smile. "You're such a weirdo. Looks like your body is more honest than your mouth. What's your real name? Don't tell me you're called Black Merc. Do you still remember your name?" Black Merc looked at Nick in shock. He didn't expect him to say something like that. But when he realized he had lost his composure, he immediately turned his head away and didn't say anything else. At this time, two strong men carrying a stretcher arrived on the field. The two strong men carried Black Merc onto the stretcher and walked out of the field. When a stretcher passed by Nick, Black Merc whispered, "My name is Gavin Evans. I'm Gordon, Evans' younger brother." Nick opened his mouth and revealed his white teeth. His smile was as bright as the sun. "My name is Nick. I'm Gordon Evans' disciple." A faint smile appeared on Hei Wu's face as he said in a low voice, "I knew it, idiot rookie. You're indeed very similar to my brother. I should have guessed it long ago." Nick watched Black Merc leave the arena. He finally felt a wave of fatigue. Black Merc was the strongest opponent he'd ever met. In order to defeat him, he had to use his ultimate move. But he was still human after all. Any human would feel fatigue, not to mention in such an intense battle. At the same time, he finally achieved his purpose of coming here. A sense of relief filled his heart. At the same time, the host walked up to the arena again. He clapped and shouted excitedly, "Amazing! It's really amazing. Although we didn't see what happened in the strange cocoon, it's still the most exciting match I've ever seen. Everyone, what do you think?" Thunderous applause and cheers came from the audience. The host walked to Nick with a smile and asked, "So, this powerful gladiator, do you choose to continue the battle or to end it? If you choose to end it, we can announce the end of the match. But if you choose to continue the battle, the prize money will be tripled." Nick smiled bitterly. "Then I'll end it. I'm really a little tired." The host laughed. "Of course. The first two matches don't count. But Grizzly Bear and Black Merc are both powerful opponents. It's normal for you to feel tired. Then, you'll get the original prize money." When Nick returned to the VIP seats, the beautiful woman rushed up and hugged him excitedly. "You always surprise me. What did you eat growing up? How did you become so powerful?" The man in black, Nick, laughed as he sat down on a chair with the help of the beautiful woman. He let out a long sigh and said, "Miss, are you praising me or insulting me? Didn't I accomplish my goal and learn some combat experience?" The beautiful woman nodded. "I see, but your idea is really unique. I can't believe you came here to learn combat experience. But it seems like the effect is not bad." Nick closed his eyes, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. "It's not just not bad. I think this decision is really wise." At this time, the beautiful woman was a little dissatisfied. "I say, you're too careless. Black Merc even attacked you after he fell to the ground. I think you went too easy on him. You can't do this in the last match." Nick laughed. "Beautiful woman, that Black Merc isn't a bad person. I can feel it. I don't think we'll be enemies in the future. Our goal is to persuade him to turn over a new leaf." The beautiful woman snorted. "If such a despicable person isn't an enemy, then why would he be a friend? All right, you should get some rest. At least your life isn't in danger." After everything was over, Nick felt a sense of relief. However, he soon realized that there were many things waiting for him to do. His master, Gordon Evans, was currently heavily injured, and his strength was much weaker than before. He had to shoulder this responsibility. During the assassination attempt on Kaiser the Great on the night of the summer celebration, his master had arranged for him to carry out another mission. Now, he had to avenge his master. After all, this empire had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Even if it had fallen, how could the assassin, the Emperor's faction, be able to shake it so quickly? Even if the assassin, the Emperor's faction, had the support of a big shot behind the scenes, it would still be difficult for them to contend against the colossus that was the German Empire. It seems that haste makes waste. In order to overthrow the tyrannical rule of Kaiser the Great, he had to do it step by step. Avina and I were watching everything from the stands of the Kellendale Coliseum. We knew that this black-clothed man wasn't simple. It was very likely that he had the clues we needed. We decided to observe him in secret. Who knows, we might be able to find some clues. After we're done here, Avina and I will leave this place and head to the south. There, we will find all the answers. Wings of Destruction, Black Dragonair Deal. Chapter 198. The Man in Black, Nick, chose to leave the Kellendale Coliseum after defeating Blackbird. He felt there was no point in continuing the competition. Miss Ada, I wonder if that Charles will make things difficult for us after we leave this place. Nick knew very well that the Blue family behind Charles was a staunch supporter of the Emperor. They controlled a lot of financial power in the Empire. They had no choice. They were now the biggest beneficiaries of Kaiser the Great's rule. I'm not sure, but let's just let nature take its course. I guess they're still afraid of my father's identity, said the beautiful woman. Her name was Ada Thomas. Her father, Andre Thomas, used to be a valiant general who fought alongside Odin the Great. However, he was now old and no longer fit to lead troops. He was now a relatively big noble with the title of Count. He also went to the Hero Palace on the day of the summer celebration. He was one of few people who survived. Now that the situation in the Empire had changed, the reputation of the people of the church had plummeted because of the revenge of the Witch Council. They could only act in a low-key manner. Even the previous vigorous witch hunt could only be carried out in secret. Many people in the Empire didn't really trust the church. Alonso, on the other hand, had sent people to stabilize the situation in the imperial capital of Galandir. The reopening of the Colosseum was one of the reasons. At the same time, he was actively contacting his family members. The Blackstone Fortress, which guarded the throat of the North, was his foundation and also the only barrier for the Delman Empire to resist the barbarians in the North. If the Blackstone Castle existed, the Empire would exist. If the Blackstone Castle died, the Empire would die. As for the chief magic consultant of the Empire, Morse, he didn't care about current affairs. He focused on his own affairs. Kaiser the Great acquiesced and supported him greatly. As for Kaiser the Great himself, he reduced his chances of communicating with the outside world. After all the things that had happened, it would only increase his risk. He wanted to bring all his pleasures to the Hero Palace. He was more strict and focused on safety. He only wanted to drink himself to death and enjoy life. He believed that life should be enjoyed while it lasted. He wanted to pursue both material and spiritual bliss. Avina and I, the black-clothed man, Nick, and the beautiful woman Ada, after investigation, we finally found out that this black-clothed man, Nick, was the disciple of the little girl's father, Gordon Evans. This Gordon was saved by his younger brother, Hey Woo. Currently, Gordon was living in Miss Ada's manor. It turned out that the mastermind behind Gordon's assassination of Kaiser the Great was Miss Ada's father, Andre. Now that Andre was old, the hair on both sides of his temples had already turned white. However, what was difficult to erase with the passage of time was the dignified temperament of this veteran who had been on the battlefield for a long time. This was the kind of perseverance and vicissitudes of life that could only be obtained after experiencing many life and death situations and crawling out from piles of corpses. A commander like Alonso, who was young and full of vigor, did not possess such a temperament. In the south of Calendir, there was a huge manor quietly sitting there. It was as peaceful and peaceful as a century-old man. On an empty field in the manor, there was a simple stone table. On both sides of the stone table, there were 2 stone stools. On the stools sat 2 men. One of them was the little girl's father, Gordon Evans, and the other was Count Andre Thomas. The old Count and Gordon sat together. However, after experiencing this incident, Gordon's body was not as good as before. Even his spirit was tired. I wonder how that brat Nick is doing. This time, I don't know why my younger brother went to the Empire's dungeon to save me. I just pity that daughter. Gordon Evans sighed as he spoke. Pull yourself together. I heard that your daughter has been saved by 2 powerful strangers. Her life should not be in danger. As for why your brother betrayed those bastards who supported the Emperor, it is very likely that he still has a conscience. When your disciple Nick returns, perhaps we will know the answer. Count Andre Thomas patted Gordon's shoulder. The 2 of them chatted as they picked up their wine glasses and took a sip. At this moment, Ada and Nick returned to the manor in the south of the city. They saw Andre Thomas and Gordon. Master, we are back. Nick reported to his master. His master had suffered too much torture in the Empire's dungeon, and his body had become very weak. It's good that you are back. Gordon was very happy to see his disciple return. You are back. Hurry up and tell me about the situation in the Beast Arena today. Did the Emperor's Brown family make things difficult for you? Andre said to the 2 children. He did not look like an old man at all. His body was very healthy. When Avina and I, who were hiding in the dark, saw this scene, I knew that the little girl's father was safe and sound. I also knew who had saved him. We were relieved. It seemed that there was no need for us to do anything. Count Andre Thomas would definitely settle them down. We had to hurry and prepare to head to the south to look for the Wing of Destruction, Black Dragon Ordeal. We had already wasted too much time. The current conflict and situation in the German Empire could not be changed just by saving or killing someone. Everything was related to each other. Everyone was just a chess piece. After Avina and I packed up, we headed to the south of the Empire. In the north, the 4 witches of the Witch Council arrived in the Kingdom of Northland. When they first arrived, they were still in a sorry state and had yet to recover from the shock. However, witches were still witches. They quickly settled down in the Kingdom of Northland and met with the King of the Northland, King Gravel, in the famous Eagle Castle. King Gravel summoned them because he wanted to recruit talented people. He wanted to gather all the available forces to prepare for his plan. Ever since the successful invasion of the German Empire's Port Pruslin, the Kingdom of Northland obtained a huge amount of wealth. This also increased their strength by more than a little. Their ambition to invade the Empire also started at this time. Gravel attached great importance to the airships, magic crystal cannons, the Empire's battleships, and other technologies that he brought back. He knew that the Northland people fought bravely. If he could give these equipment to the Northland people, they would be like a tiger that had grown wings. Take the matter of the Witch Council, for example. Gravel's intelligence personnel in Kellendal had also reported their battle results to King Gravel. Naturally, King Gravel did not dare to neglect them. Chapter 199. At this moment in the north, the Kingdom of Northland, the whole country was full of fighting spirit, and the atmosphere of striving for progress was everywhere. The merchants transported their goods to various places, the farmers worked hard, the soldiers trained hard, and even the nobles and ministers were busy with their own work. The wealth and technology brought back changed the lives of every Northland citizen. People were united, motivated, and fair in their rewards and punishments, giving everyone hope and motivation in life. They all had a common enemy, and that was the Derman of the Empire. They had to continue to develop and grow, and one day they would be able to compete with the Empire. Wearing a golden mask and a black cloak, Claudia's black hair naturally fell to her shoulders. She was very beautiful. Nikela and Serena, this pair of buffoons, had 2 attributes, one ice and one fire. Their daily routine was to argue, which added a lot of fun to everyone. As for Sevilla, she did not hold a magic wand or wear a magician's robe. She wore a green dress, looking like a pure, calm, and dignified noble lady. She was completely different from the pair of buffoons, Nikela and serene. It was such a strange combination of four. They were the Witch Council. At the most critical time, they were rescued by strangers and teleported to the town of Boheap outside the city of Kellendil. They fled all the way to the north to avoid the pursuit of the church. After arriving in the Kingdom of Northland, they quickly settled down with their abilities and were soon summoned by King Gravel. King Gravel summoned them to Eagle Castle because he had long heard of their names in the intelligence reports. On the other hand, he felt that they were very powerful. If they could be used by the kingdom, it would be a joyous thing. At this time, the hall of Eagle Castle was brightly lit. It was neither too hot nor too cold. The summer temperature in the north was much colder than in the Empire. The four beautiful women, led by the Northland guards, came to the hall of Eagle Castle. The guards at the door questioned them and checked that they did not carry any weapons with them, and then let them in to see King Gravel. King Gravel was sitting on the throne. At this moment, he was sitting there alone, reading a book. There was no one else here. Under the lead of the masked Crocea, the other three witches followed the Northland etiquette and bowed to King Gravel. King Gravel did not put on any airs and immediately asked them to come forward and have lunch with him. The four witches did not decline. After all, it was close to noon, and it was not a bad idea to have lunch with King Gravel in the famous Eagle Castle. Just like that, the five of them chatted as they ate. King Gravel looked at the golden-masked Crocea with a strange expression. He was very curious. Didn't Crocea feel uncomfortable wearing this mask? Your Majesty, do you have any questions? Seeing that King Gravel was looking at her strangely, Crocea asked, Nothing. I just feel that you don't feel uncomfortable wearing a mask when eating. King Gravel was also very straightforward and did not think too much about it. There are very scary scars on my face, so it is inconvenient for me to show them. I hope your Majesty can forgive me. Crocea said, It's fine, I was just curious. But I'm sorry, I shouldn't have reminded you of this. Gravel felt that he had made the atmosphere a little awkward. Your Majesty, since the scars have already formed, I can only get used to it. Crocea replied, All right, I heard that you turned Kellendil upside down. I also feel very happy and admire you. I wonder if you are willing to stay on my side and be the magic consultant of the Kingdom of Northland? Gravel went straight to the point. At this moment, the long table was already filled with food and exquisite silverware. However, the food of the Kingdom of Northland, even if it was the king's banquet, was far from the Empire's. Whether it was the variety, the level of cooking, or the ingredients, it could not be compared to the Empire's. However, Serena was eating very happily. She was eating a roasted lamb leg that was almost as big as her face. On the other hand, Nikela was eating the sweets. On the other hand, Sevia was eating some vegetarian food. It was clear that the difference between the three was very big. As King Gravel spoke, he stuffed a juicy fruit into his mouth and chewed it. He looked at Crocea, hoping that she would give him a satisfactory answer. Your Majesty Gravel, for the time being, we do not have any plans to be the magic consultants of the Kingdom of Northland. If we did, we would naturally come to you. We came here not only to avoid the pursuit of the church, but also to tell you some news, Crocea said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Oh, what news? King Gravel looked at the four mysterious witches with great interest. He had developed a strong interest in them. Although he did not know these witches well, he knew that they would not harm him because they had a common enemy, and that was the German Empire and the Church. The enemy of an enemy was a friend. After the meal, King Gravel asked them to stay in the Eagle Castle. There were many luxurious rooms and maids here. If they stayed here, they would not have to worry about food and clothing. They would also be allowed to do their own research, as long as it did not harm the interests of the Kingdom of Northland. However, all of these were rejected by Crocea. Nikela was originally looking forward to such a life. She was a little disappointed, but she obeyed Crocea's decision, just as she had always done. At the same time, in order to express her gratitude for King Gravel's affectionate hospitality, Crocea said that she was a dream teller. She could help the king with some divination and predict the future if King Gravel needed it. King Gravel thought for a moment. He really did need some guidance about the future. He asked Crocea what to do and when to start. Crotia told him that it was actually very simple to perform a divination. All he needed was a bed, but this bed had to be the bed that the person who wanted to know the prophecy had slept on. He only needed to write down what he wanted to ask in advance on a piece of paper. When the time came, he would burn the paper in front of Crotia. Then Crotia would inhale the smoke in her body and lie down on the bed to sleep. When Crotia awoke, she would tell His Majesty Gravel all the future she had foreseen in her dream and all the doubts she had written on that paper. As for when they could perform the divination, Crotia said that since they had nothing to do in the afternoon, they could perform the divination right now. It just depended on King Gravel's convenience. Chapter 200. Just like that, King Gravel agreed to Crotia's divination. He wrote down his plans for the future in Northland on a piece of parchment. Once everything was ready, he lit the parchment in front of Crotia. Soon, the parchment turned into a wisp of green smoke. Crotia took a deep breath and inhaled the smoke into her lungs through her golden mask. Crotia didn't cough. If it had been someone else who had inhaled so much smoke, they would have long since started coughing. Soon, Crotia lay down on King Gravel's bed and fell asleep within moments. Nikela, Serena, and Sevia stood guard by Crotia's bedside. This wasn't the first time they'd seen Crotia use her ability to divine dreams. As the divination continued, Crotia tossed and turned on the bed, looking like she was in great pain. King Gravel looked at her from the side, feeling a little worried. Finally, after half an afternoon, Crotia opened her eyes. King Gravel immediately went to greet her and asked how she was. The other three witches also looked at Crotia with concern. I saw many mercenaries, grassland cavalrymen, and even knights of the church. I saw His Majesty leading the defeated soldiers and being chased by the Empire's troops, almost losing his life. I also saw a map, and then there was the raging fire of Blackstone Castle. The raging fire would devour everything. All of this was merely a game of the Grim Reaper, and no one could escape from it. Crotia finished speaking in one breath, the scene she encountered in her dream. After hearing this, King Gravel was speechless for a long time. He knew that he'd gotten the answers he wanted to know, but the last few sentences were too ambiguous. He could hear that it was a bad omen, but on second thought, perhaps everything was already destined. He just had to be himself. Just like that, King Gravel knew what would happen next. It was similar to what he'd expected, so no matter what the outcome was, he had to give it his all. Originally, King Gravel wanted to have the four witches stay for dinner, but since Crotia insisted on going back, King Gravel didn't force her to stay. The next day, according to plan, King Gravel summoned Helen, who had been following him all this time. Helen had always been his butler and one of his most trusted people. Thinking of this, he thought of Tani. Unfortunately, he'd already returned to the embrace of God. When Gravel summoned Helen, Helen knew that something important must have happened. Sure enough, Gravel told Helen that he was going to send someone to the Grassland Kingdom in the west, the Kurut Kingdom. He also told Helen that Helen was the candidate for the position of Foreign Affairs Minister. Hybel was taken aback. He didn't expect Gravel to give him such an important task. It was enough to show how much Gravel trusted and valued him. Helen was very happy. He didn't expect that at his age, he could still make his own contribution to this newly established independent country. At the same time, he was a little worried that he wasn't up to the task. However, Gravel trusted Helen very much and said that he had already arranged for the people to set off tomorrow. He also said that he had prepared a very meaningful gift for the Khan of Kurut and asked Helen to personally deliver it to the Khan of Kurut. Gravel said that Helen would represent the Kingdom of Northland and represent him, King Gravel, to form an alliance with the Grassland Kingdom. As a newly established country, the Kingdom of Northland naturally had a lot of diplomatic trifles to deal with. As a foreign affairs minister of the Kingdom of Northland, Helen was now fully immersed in his role. He took the goods all the way to the west, going through all kinds of hardships and dangers, crossing the towering mountains and entering the Grassland Kingdom, the Kurut Kingdom. Now he had arrived at the city of Lauma in the Kurut Kingdom. Amidst a group of strong warriors, he slowly walked into the great hall of the Kurut Kingdom's Khan. The capital of the Kurut Kingdom was called Lauma. The strongest warriors of the grassland lived here, and the fattest cattle and sheep of the grassland were reared here. In fact, it had been a long time since an envoy from the south came to Lauma to negotiate. After the Kurut kingdom fell into a civil war, the Kurut kingdom no longer had the ability to harass the German Empire. They could only plunder some things in the desert before returning to their grasslands. The barren grasslands had no or resources, so they could only live in the north. The reason why the German Empire didn't go north to destroy the Kurut kingdom was because they were too poor and didn't care for that barren land. Another reason was that the empire was now in a mess and couldn't support a northern expedition. However, King Gravel didn't think that the Kurut kingdom was useless. He felt that it could at least provide him with livestock, cotton, and other raw materials. It was a good natural ally to form an alliance with. So he sent Helen, a veteran who had followed him to this day, in hopes that he could complete the treaty between the Kingdom of Northland and the Kurut Kingdom, forming a strategic partnership between the two countries. The Kingdom of Northland could use the Kurut Kingdom as a dumping ground for goods, while the Kurut Kingdom could export raw materials to the Kingdom of Northland in exchange for more daily necessities. This was definitely a win-win business, so King Gravel didn't think that the other side would refuse such an alliance. The Kingdom of Northland really had too many daily necessities of the Kurut Kingdom. Not only that, they also had a common enemy, the German Empire. In the past 2 months, the Kurut Kingdom was extremely dependent on the salt that the Kingdom of Northland exported to the Kurut Kingdom, including ironware and some other things. The Kingdom of Northland's economic invasion and control of the Kurut Kingdom was greater than at any time in history. Conser leaned back in his chair and looked down at Helen, who walked in. He didn't seem to have any intention of speaking. Beside him, a minister dressed in a long robe looked at Hybel. He dragged his voice and pretended to be dignified as he asked, "You, the envoy from the east, what are you here for?" "I'm here to form an alliance with the Kurut Kingdom." Helen introduced himself. "On behalf of the Kingdom of Northland, I'm here to convey the will of eternal peace. We've always been at peace." On the other side, a general with a saber at his waist mocked in a repulsive tone. The surrounding generals of the Kurut Kingdom laughed. They had to go west several times a year, and their main target was the desert kingdom of Aruz. Chapter 201. I am here on behalf of King Gravel of the Kingdom of Northland, and I have come with great sincerity. If the Kurut Kingdom is not willing to coexist peacefully with us, then I will leave immediately. Hybel looked at the generals of the Kurut Kingdom with contempt and said coldly. His words angered many of the fierce generals, but before they could retaliate, the robed minister spoke first. "We have always abided by the treaty, and peace is what we desire. However, our treaty seems to have been signed with the German Empire, not the Kingdom of Northland. The Kingdom of Northland is now the only legitimate regime in the north." Hybel argued, "Although the Kurut Kingdom lost the treaty back then, we still have tens of thousands of cavalry ready for battle." The minister flaunted his military strength and threatened Hybel. In his view, the Kingdom of Northland was the best target for plundering. They had salt, cloth, ironware, and all sorts of other wonderful things. If he could snatch these things, it would greatly alleviate the poverty of the Kurut Kingdom. Hybel smiled and asked, "Then if one day the Kingdom of Northland came to the grasslands to hunt, would the Kurut Kingdom welcome them?" "How dare you?" A general wanted to step forward with his long sword, but he was stopped by the minister with a look. The other generals who wanted to step forward saw the expression on the minister's face and suppressed their urge to go on a rampage. After the minister stopped the general who stepped forward, he took 2 steps forward and looked at Hybel. "Actually, I really want to know on what basis you dare to cross the mountain range and talk about the treaty with us." Hearing this, Hybel grinned. He looked at Seru Khan, who was still sitting on the throne, and requested, "Since you want to see our strength, I will first bring up the gift our king gave to your majesty." The minister frowned, then nodded and agreed to Hybel's request. Soon, 2 soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland carried a small wooden box and walked to Hybel's side. They opened the wooden box and revealed a long object inside. No one present could recognize this object, but it had a famous name in the Kingdom of Northland, Glory's Fury. This was a crossbow that the Kingdom of Northland had copied from the crossbow seized from the German Empire. Hybel reached out and took out the brand-new crossbow from the box. He pulled the bowstring clumsily and put a crossbow bolt into the groove. Then, he aimed at a pillar in the distance and pulled the trigger. Bang! After a crisp sound, all the guards and generals were so frightened that they drew their swords and wanted to stop Hybel, who was holding a dangerous weapon. However, Hybel put the weapon back into the box and looked contemptuously at the generals of the Kuruth kingdom who only knew how to show off their bravery. This is the Glory's Fury developed by the Kingdom of Northland. The king asked me to give it to your majesty. As Hybel spoke, he pointed at the crossbow in the box and said, "If the Kuruth kingdom is willing to form an alliance with us, then whether it is iron, cloth, salt, or the like, we will provide you with sufficient supplies. We will not skimp on them. If the Kuruth kingdom insists on fighting with the Kingdom of Northland, then the soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland, equipped with this weapon, will welcome your majesty's brave warriors." After saying this, Hybel waved his hand. The two soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland put down the box and turned to leave. They did not even look at the sharp swords around them. The strong Seru Khan finally stood up from his throne. His body was as burly as a wall. He stepped on the soft wool carpet and walked to Hybel's side before saying, "You had the chance to kill me just now. If your majesty insists on becoming enemies with the Kingdom of Northland, there are too many soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland who can shoot better than me." Hybel did not back down. He stared into Seru Khan's eyes and retorted. Seru Khan bent down and took out the crossbow from a box. He handed it to Hybel and said, "One more time. I was too far away to see clearly." After taking the crossbow from Seru Khan, Hybel pulled the bolt and reloaded it. He then handed it back to Seru Khan. The burly Seru Khan took the loaded crossbow and listened to Hybel's explanation. Then, he raised his rifle and assumed a shooting posture. He pointed the black muzzle at Hybel, who was still standing there. "Pull this thing called the trigger, and you'll die." "Yes, your majesty. If you pull this trigger, I will die." Hybel nodded. He felt a very dangerous aura. It was the aura of a ruler that made people tremble. Seru Khan succeeded the throne when he was 7 years old. In the past 20 years, he had built the Kuruth kingdom into the strongest kingdom in history. He relied on ruthlessness and killing. Now he wanted to kill, so the aura he emitted was so dense that it made it difficult for people to breathe. Bang! Seru Khan pulled the trigger, but he was not aiming at Hybel. He shot the general who was yelling about robbing. The crossbow bolt easily pierced through the general's armor, leaving a small hole that was not as big as the arrow. However, the general was in a much worse state than being shot by the crossbow bolt. He widened his eyes and tried to cover the wound on his chest, but he found that he could not even lift his arms. He struggled to stand on the spot, but he staggered and fell backwards. It was not until he was lying on the ground with his back drenched in blood that he realized how powerful the weapon in Seru Khan's hand was. Ugh! He wanted to say something, but he only let out a muffled groan and closed his eyes forever. Around him, the group of generals who didn't dare to move looked at the corpses on the ground and swallowed their saliva before calming themselves down. The decision has been made. Kuruth and the Kingdom of Northland. Peace. Seru Khan put down the crossbow. "This is good. I like it very much," he went on, laughing heartily. Chapter 202. Khan, are you going to let that guy from the Kingdom of Northland leave just like that? After Hybel left the hall, the minister in robes looked at Khan Seru and asked. No one would dare to be so rude in front of the Khan and leave alive. The warriors of the grasslands who were intimidated by the crossbow also looked over at this moment, waiting for the Khan's order to rush out and cut Hybel into pieces. Seru Kagin waved his hand and ordered, "Men, drag the body out. We'll wait for a few more days. Don't go west to plunder the desert kingdom of Haruz for now." "Are we going to give in just like that, Khan?" The long-robed official furrowed his brows and asked in an unwilling manner. "Forget it? Forget it. It's not that big of a deal." Khan Seru snorted coldly. then looked at his confidant and asked, "Who do we have the biggest grudge against?" "The Kuruk kingdom of the grasslands has the biggest grudge against the Empire. Back then, our ancestors brought 300,000 armored cavalry to the south, and what happened? The German Empire's heavy cavalry and various magical weapons easily destroyed our dreams of conquering the German Empire." Khan Seru slowly walked back to his throne and reached out to touch the wolf head carving on it. He turned around and looked at his generals and ministers, then continued to ask, "You all think that we shouldn't give in, but let me ask you, my brave warriors, do we still have the courage to go south and conquer the German Empire?" After asking this question, the generals who were still clamoring not to let the Norland kingdom off all lowered their heads. The scene of the magic crystal cannons spewing flames and blasting the grassland cavalry was still painted on the walls of the hall. How could they forget the despair and fear that was deeply rooted in their bones? "Since we've already given in, why can't we give in again?" Khan Seru laughed coldly, his voice echoing throughout the hall. "If the kingdom of Northland is willing to trade with us and provide us with the necessities of life, why would we still plunder? If they can't keep their promise, how much will we delay if we continue to plunder?" Khan Seru sat back on his throne and said, "All we have to do is wait. Wait for a trustworthy king to appear, or wait for a treacherous pig to reveal its weakness. Your Majesty is wise." The leader in robes bowed and praised. "We just have to wait. If the German Empire isn't stupid, they will definitely start a conflict with the Kingdom of Northland. The conflict between them is irreconcilable, and we will only stand on the side of those who benefit us. Your Majesty is wise." All the generals and ministers bowed and praised Khan Seru. Amidst the thunderous cheers, Khan Seru narrowed his eyes. He knew that he was gambling. He was gambling on whether the Norland Kingdom really had the courage and power to change the order of this world. If the Kingdom of Northland really succeeded, he wouldn't mind helping the Kingdom of Northland and using the power of the Kingdom of Northland to destroy the German Empire. If the Kingdom of Northland failed, he wouldn't mind continuing to plunder in the West and returning to his old profession. As for whether he would sit back and watch the Kingdom of Northland rise, he didn't care at all. The rising Kingdom of Northland would definitely clash with the German Empire in the south. Who was stronger and who was weaker would naturally be revealed by then. The worst outcome would be that the Kingdom of Northland defeated the German Empire. Then, the Kuruth Kingdom would have nothing to lose by forming an alliance with the Kingdom of Northland. This was the true strategy of a ruler. His decisions were built on the basis of maximizing benefits. Outside the hall, Haebul raised his chin and walked towards the inn with his followers without looking back. He knew that he had completed his mission this time. The Kuruth Kingdom could no longer threaten the Kingdom of Northland in the west. Once the dumping began, countless materials would pour into the grasslands and completely destroy the already fragile economy. In the end, this place would become a raw material supply base, providing wool and cotton for the Kingdom of Northland. It would no longer be able to cause any trouble. The developed Kingdom of Northland would only have more and better weapons and equipment. The 100,000 cavalrymen that the Kuruth Kingdom was so proud of would eventually disappear into the dust of history. Just wait. We'll be back soon. Haebul thought of his new country and smiled knowingly. At that time, he really didn't think that he would become a foreign affairs minister today. Kill. On the training ground, thousands of soldiers who had just joined the army for a month were practicing their combat skills. Because of the time constraints, their combat skills were trained together with their formation skills. This time, because they were well prepared, every soldier was equipped with a sword, shield, helmet, and armor. They looked very valiant. They all wore helmets unique to the Northland and stood under the scorching sun, sweating profusely as they held round wooden shields and stabbed forward with their swords again and again. Their combat movements were very simple, only blocking and stabbing. They were coherent and easy to grasp. Although many grassroots commanders believed that the possibility of the enemy's close-range attacks was very low after they were equipped with crossbows, the close-range combat training was retained, and it was even strengthened under Ragnar's suggestion. On the other end of the training ground, The soldiers who had been in the army for more than 3 months had to practice crossbow shooting every day. This was the best training conditions that King Gravel could prepare for these recruits. The craftsmen worked overtime every day to produce crossbows, but they were still unable to meet the increasing demand for crossbows. Originally, more than 1,000 people were required to practice crossbow shooting, but now the Kingdom of Northland had expanded to 3,000 crossbowmen. This was a huge pressure for the craftsmen who had just achieved the ability to produce crossbows. According to the plans of King Gravel, Horf Wood, and Bethman Watson, the Kingdom of Northland should form 20,000 heavy infantry, 5,000 heavy cavalry, at least 100 magic crystal cannons, and about 8,000 crossbowmen. In addition, in order to deal with the threat of the German Empire, in addition to the crossbow bolts that had been used up during training, they also needed to stockpile crossbow bolts for use in a possible war. According to King Gravel's conservative estimate, he would at least need to stockpile a large number of crossbow bolts before the war with the German Empire. Chapter 203. It was actually very difficult to accumulate so many crossbow bolts in the process of consumption. Moreover, these crossbow bolts were all made of real gold and silver. After they were produced and stored in the warehouse, it was equivalent to squeezing out so much money for nothing. Just looking at it made one's heart ache. If they had used this money to develop other areas, they might have been able to obtain more benefits. Looking at the soldiers who were seriously training on the drill ground, King Gravel was still uncertain about the future war with the German Empire. His army was really too small, and it was troublesome to expand it. It was really a headache. What he lacked now was time. However, there was no time for him to steadily develop and strengthen his army. After this summer, it was very likely that a war would break out next year. Kill! On the drill ground, a mighty voice shouted again. King Gravel looked at these young faces expressionlessly. However, in his heart, he was thinking about the German Empire. The Kingdom of Northland had always been able to stand tall due to its difficult terrain. It had become a big problem for the German Empire. Tyrone William had always wanted to seize a part of the Kingdom of Northland's territory to prove his achievements. I can only use this once. Looking at the huge magic crystal cannons that were being dragged forward by war horses, Tyrone William's heart was filled with emotions. The soldiers of the German Empire held the reins of their war horses and walked step by step on the road that was no longer smooth. Behind the horse carriages, there were ancient and heavy magic crystal cannons. Under the sunlight, the black cannons flickered with a dark light. Further away, groups of soldiers carried 3-meter-long spears and walked in orderly steps across the entire hillside. 30,000 soldiers was not a small number. An unprecedented war was about to begin. The grudge between the Kingdom of Northland and the German Empire might be completely resolved in this war. Of course, it could also be worse. Moving his gaze away from those giant magic crystal cannons, Tyrone William clenched the information in his hand. His tone was filled with coldness as he muttered, "He's really a troublesome child. Isn't it good to just stay at home, now that you've fallen to another country?" He crumpled the information in his hand into a ball and threw it into the ground with disdain. "After I defeat the Kingdom of Northland, I'll teach you a lesson." Tyrone Williams was concerned about his youngest son, Joe Williams, and the purpose of his expedition to the north. With that, he pulled the reins of his war horse, and with a group of guards surrounding him, he mounted the horse and ordered, "Let the troops continue to advance. Just maintain this speed." Also, Zorn adjusted the horse's position as he instructed one of his trusted subordinates, "Send someone to the Norland Kingdom. Have them wash their necks and wait for me." When he said this, Tyrone William had a heroic aura. When he returned to the capital of the German Empire, his prestige in the empire might be higher than that of his son, Alonso. At that time, a small kingdom of Northland would not be a threat at all. As long as there was a bigger battle, that damned King Gravel of the Kingdom of Northland would be captured without a fight. He would then kneel in front of Tyrone William, crying and begging for a way to live. Thinking of this, Tyrone William snorted coldly and urged his horse forward. He wanted to bring the troops to the north before winter came. If he was lucky, he might be able to win the war at the border of the Norland Kingdom before winter came. When spring arrives next year, he would be able to go up north and attack the Kingdom of Northland. This was a good way to go. It would allow him to gain more military merits and prove his ability to his son and the Emperor. Woo! A melodious sound of a horn came from the distant ridge. It was the order for the troops to continue moving forward. All the soldiers continued to move forward until they reached the end of the road. On the other side, a group of cavalrymen wearing black armor raised the flag of the Kingdom of Northland. They escorted a long convoy of carriages and slowly moved forward on the plains. Above their heads, the black eagle flag fluttered in the wind. The armor on their bodies clashed with the steps of their war horses. Every single one of the cavalrymen straightened their backs. They represented a great country that had never been defeated since its birth. On the distant hill, a group of cavalrymen from the grasslands gathered bit by bit. Each of them had 3 horses and looked mighty. Whoa! When they got close to the convoy of the Kingdom of Northland, the leader of the cavalrymen from the grasslands pulled his reins and sat on his horse. He looked at the well-equipped cavalrymen of the Kingdom of Northland and said, "I hope the things you bring are valuable." On the other side, the leader of the cavalrymen from the Kingdom of Northland grinned. He pulled his reins and turned his horse around. He came to the side of a carriage and pulled out his sword. He then stabbed the sack behind the carriage. Whoosh! White powder began to flow out from a hole in the sack and scattered on the grassland like a silver waterfall. It looked like flowing spring water. It was pleasing to look at. When the leader of the grasslands saw the white powder falling down, his eyes widened even more. He did not even have time to give orders. He squeezed his horse's belly and rushed to the carriage. Immediately after, he dismounted from his horse. Due to his excitement, he staggered to the side of the carriage. Using his hand, he caught the falling silver powder and brought it to his mouth for a taste. Ah, it's salt. Because of his heartache, he even wanted to use his hand to block the hole made by the sword. However, he found that the entire carriage was filled with identical sacks. In shock, he turned around and looked at the leader of the cavalrymen from the Kingdom of Northland. "These are all salt?" The leader of the cavalrymen from the Kingdom of Northland smiled even more brightly. He pointed at the long convoy behind and said with certainty, 20 carriages. They are all filled with table salt. There are also 20 carriages filled with ironware and porcelain. Salt! As if he thought of something, the leader of the grasslands turned around and raised his right hand to the cavalryman he brought with him. He shouted loudly, "Oh!" The fierce-looking cavalrymen from the grasslands immediately shouted like a tsunami. Each wave was louder than the last. Many people dismounted from their horses and gathered around the carriage. With curious eyes, they looked at the salt bags that were rarely seen in the past. "Oh my God, it's ironware! It's ironware!" On the other side, a few people from the grasslands who lifted the curtains of the carriages shouted in horror. They saw that the shining iron pots were stacked together to save space. They were stacked together to form a huge iron pillar. Chapter 204. Some of the carriages were stacked neatly with glass products. The crystal-clear bottles and cups made the people of the grassland drop their jaws. They caressed the warm glass products and did not want to let go. After a while, the grassland general finally remembered something. He held the reins and walked to the captain of the Kingdom of Northland. He placed his right hand on his chest and asked, "We know that these are expensive goods. How much does the Kingdom of Northland want us to pay this time?" "The glass products are cheap, 30 copper coins for a bottle. The iron pots are more expensive. After all, we are also short of iron. The price is 15 silver coins." The captain of the Kingdom of Northland did not speak. A merchant beside him talked about the price of these goods. In fact, he made a lot of money because the price of these goods in the Kingdom of Northland was about half of the price he quoted now. As for the salt, the price is also very reasonable. 100 gold coins for a carriage. I will leave the carriage to you. The merchant was overjoyed as he calculated the abacus. His trip this time was really fruitful, with a gross income of more than 1,000 gold coins. Just the trade volume of this caravan alone was already so huge. Originally, when the grassland general heard the price of 100 gold coins, he was prepared to be cheated by the profiteer. But when he heard that the unit was carriage, his expression became interesting. He looked up at the captain of the kingdom of Northland and raised his hand to pass the reins of his horse to the captain. "You are the most respectable merchants I have ever seen. This horse is the most handsome in the grassland. I will give it to you. It will be a testimony of our friendship. Welcome to the grassland. Tonight, we will not rest until we are drunk. Kill the sheep. Welcome the distinguished guests." After that, he shouted to his people. The grassland people who were on horseback or had already dismounted also cheered. "Oh, kill the sheep. Kill the sheep. I heard that trading with the grassland people is very dangerous." The merchant looked at the captain of the knights beside him with a puzzled expression. In the past, a bag of salt cost 10 gold coins. The captain of the knights tied the reins of the other warhorse to his saddle and replied without raising his head. The merchant was stunned for a moment, and then he realized in despair how many gold coins he had just lost. However, at this moment, at the border between the German Empire and the Kingdom of Northland, there were some villages and towns in the Kingdom of Northland near the Wilson Mountains. Boom! Boom! At the border between the Kingdom of Northland and the German Empire, a round of magic crystal cannons landed in the middle of a dense crowd. The guards of the village were cut up by the rampaging cannonballs, plowing out trails of blood. The magic crystal cannons, developed by the magicians, had rewritten the history of war. The side that had the magic crystal cannons seemed to have the upper hand on the battlefield. The soldiers of the German Empire were advancing steadily. They could already see the smile of the goddess of victory. These magic crystal cannons were transferred from Kellendil to the Blackstone Castle through Alonso. The magic crystal cannons were a kind of gold-devouring beast that consumed a lot of magic crystals. Without enough strength, even if they were given to him for free, he would not be able to afford to use them. The Northland soldiers who were originally in a tight formation were now staggering. The terrifying magic cannons fell from the sky and splashed a bloody rain into the crowd. The entire line of defense was collapsing. The officers of the Kingdom of Northland were no longer able to stop the collapse of their soldiers. At this moment, they did not want to stop this collapse because they were also in the midst of the collapsing crowd. No one dared to face such a terrifying weapon. Everyone thought that the German Empire was going all out this time to take revenge. Therefore, the Northland soldiers were not only defeated by the power of the weapon, but also by the aura of the enemy. Did our God abandon us? An officer crawled up from the ground with blood all over his face. He cried as he tried to find his arm. His armored arm was cut off by a hot current, like butter being cut by a hot knife. One of the soldiers struggled to stand up, only to find that his legs were gone. He tried his best to shout, but found that he could only spit out blood. Soon, he became motionless, lying down with the corpses around him, not making any sound. Not far away, the army of the German Empire was marching in an orderly manner. Along with the sound of drums, they approached the hellish battlefield step by step. There was no longer any organized resistance in front of them. There were only a few crazy enemy soldiers. Countless spears were leveled and then swept away everything in front of them. Some soldiers who forgot to run were quickly stabbed to the ground. The German soldiers continued to advance step by step, completely ignoring the corpses under their feet. Long live the German! On the high slope, the soldiers who hadn't had time to participate in this crushing attack let out mountainous cheers. Their flags fluttered in the sky, and their voices echoed across the plains. Riding on a tall horse, Tyrone William pointed at the battle formation in the distance with his armored glove. He proudly said to his followers, "Look, there is no one on the border of the Northland who can stop the army of the German Empire. No, this is our northern province. We are only here to kill these pitiful traitors." Yes, yes. An officer had a flattering smile on his face. He praised Tyrone William and said, "Sir, you are the best commander. Under your leadership, the German Empire will definitely reach the peak." Ha ha ha! Tyrone William laughed out loud. However, his laughter did not spread far before it was drowned out by the sound of the war drums. He proudly pulled on the reins of his war horse and said, "These small towns will definitely report this matter to Gravel. Unfortunately, they will never expect that we have already set up cannons in front of their homes." "Ha ha! Sir, you are so wise. Sir, you are so wise. Sir, you are really the star of the Derman." The group of flattering officers hurriedly nodded their heads and bowed, flattering Tyrone William. After hearing these praises, the smile on Tyrone William's face became even brighter, and he became even more proud. He was in a good mood and gave an even more radical order. "Order the troops. We do not need prisoners." Chapter 205. In the distance in front of him, there were square formations full of iron armor that were slowly moving towards the end of the horizon. The first battle between the German Empire and the Kingdom of Northland ended with the German Empire's complete victory. In this battle, Tyrone William led 30,000 troops of the German Empire and easily swept away the border guards of the Kingdom of Northland. At least 3,000 Northland soldiers and civilians were slaughtered. However, the German Empire paid a very small price for this victory. They did not even manage to gather 200 wounded soldiers. The magic crystal cannons that had just been shown on the battlefield had already demonstrated the terrifying power of this terrifying war machine. It was also because of the good performance of the magic crystal cannons in this battle that Tyrone William liked this weapon even more. "Tell the rear to hurry up. This weapon should be equipped with every castle and every army." Tyrone William urged his horse forward and ordered one of his confidants. "After this victory, I think the Northland will soon surrender. After we go back, I want at least 100 new cannons." He continued to speak as he moved forward. "The next battle won't be so easy. They also have cannons like this. So, the situation of the war won't be so one-sided." Not only that, there was also the problem of supply. It was extremely difficult to establish a supply line because of the Wilson Mountains. This was also the reason why the Empire had been reluctant to make a move for so many years. The last expedition that was urged by Kaiser the Great had been interrupted because of the supply line, and many soldiers had died tragically in foreign lands. At this time, in the Eagle Castle in the capital of the Kingdom of Northland, Gorgon. "As long as Tyrone William leads his main force north, our border may be penetrated. This is a loss for us because the war will destroy our carefully paved roads and our crops." He pointed at a very large and detailed military map and pointed at the location of the border with the Empire. "The best way is to have most of our men head south in advance and gather at the border. Be prepared for battle at any time," Horf said from the side. If Tyrone William's plan to attack the Kingdom of Northland was only a rough plan, then King Gravel's plan to fight against the German Empire was already a very precise battle plan. But who would have thought that the Tyrone Empire's army had already marched north, catching the Kingdom of Northland off guard? On the other hand, in Larma, the capital of the Kurut Kingdom, a middle-aged merchant blew a breath of hot air onto his hands. He wrapped his hands tightly around the fur from the grasslands, looked up at the signboard above his head, and strode into the rice shop. The shop assistant inside hurriedly came over to greet them. At this time, those who came to buy rice must be very, very rich merchants. After all, the price of rice in the Kurut Kingdom was not cheap. As long as they waited until next year's harvest season, when the new grain was harvested, the price of rice would immediately fall. If they did not need it urgently, it was obviously more profitable to consider purchasing grain next year. However, since summer, the price of rice, which should have fallen, had become incomprehensible due to the frantic purchase of the Kingdom of Northland. Now, these grains were really expensive, and there were even countless merchants from the Kingdom of Northland coming to buy them. It was really hard to tell what they were thinking. "How much grain do you have left to sell in your shop? I want all of it." As soon as the merchant entered, he did not beat around the bush and directly stated his purpose. When the shop assistant heard this, the smile on his face stiffened. There were more and more merchants from the kingdom of Northland who came to cause trouble recently. They said that they wanted to buy all the grain as soon as they arrived, and it was as if they did not want to leave a way out for others. However, they were all guests, and the shop assistant did not want to offend these big merchants. After all, at this time next year, the price of grain might fall, and he would still have to rely on these merchants to buy grain to eat. So he squeezed out a somewhat forced smile and explained, "Sir, you may not be aware, but because of the sharp decline in grain reserves, His Majesty has issued a purchase restriction order. You can only purchase 50 barrels of grain at a time. The unit of calculation of grain was actually a way of measuring grain by volume, and it was neither accurate nor scientific. However, because each country had its own measurement system, such things could only be tolerated. Now, the Kingdom of Northland had begun to popularize new units of measurement. There were various units of length and weight, which made it much more convenient for people to use. Coupled with the widespread use of new numbers, all the territories under the rule of King Gravel had made great progress in their calculations. "Can't you make an exception?" The merchant pressed a gold coin on the coffee table beside him, and the golden light was so dazzling that it was difficult to open one's eyes. 100 barrels. This is the best deal we can do. The shop assistant looked around before putting the gold coin into his pocket and said, "The price will be the same as this morning. This is the best deal." Everyone knew that there was no need to worry about grain sales now, and everyone had their eyes on this area. The locals were driving up prices, and the foreigners were frantically buying. The grain stock in the rice shops was rapidly decreasing, and the Kuruth kingdom had even begun to fall into a state of partial shortage. "All right." The merchant was easy to talk to and nodded in agreement. He stood up and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you to pack up all the grain. I'll be shipping it away soon." There was no other way. Although it pained him, he could only take out his money pouch from his pocket and place a stack of gold coins on the table for the other party to examine carefully. 100 barrels of grain would not even be worth a single gold coin in the past, but now it was so expensive. Not only that, the Kingdom of Northland was racking their brains to buy large amounts of grain, but they were also frantically buying meat products from the grasslands. Not only were they buying fresh, live cattle and sheep, but they were also buying dried meat. After all, the population of the Kingdom of Northland was growing, and King Gravel had ordered a large amount of grain to be stored before winter. In every rice shop in every corner of the Kuruth kingdom, there were merchants from the Kingdom of Northland frantically buying grain. They did not care about the price. As long as the other party dared to sell, they would dare to pay for the grain. On the bustling streets of Galgalin, everyone had a happy smile on their face. In the past, such smiles were rare, but now almost everyone in the Kingdom of Northland was full of hope for the future, so smiles were the most common expression. Chapter 206. No one believed that the Kingdom of Northland would collapse. Many merchants had already placed their bets on another possibility. In their opinion, the Kingdom of Northland was going to replace the once invincible German Empire. However, when the news spread from the border to the Eagle Fortress in Gorgorin, the Northland knight who was covered in wounds was told by King Gravel that he could rest. However, the dagger that was stabbed into his body made him unable to believe that the king would treat him this way. The next day, an emergency military meeting was held in the Eagle stronghold. Wilson's Lord Bethman forced a smile and thanked the king. "This is my problem. I didn't have to trouble the king to help me. It's time for us to draw our swords, Bethman. The German Empire is one step ahead of us. There's no turning back. We can only keep moving forward." King Gravel had a smile on his face as he comforted Bethman. "If you really want to save your civilians, you should pull yourself together, right?" At this time, the news of the Kingdom of Northland's border collapsing was still being kept secret. Ordinary citizens had no idea what had happened at the border. However, paper couldn't wrap fire, and the news still spread like wildfire among the people. King Gravel thought for a moment and said, "Things are going in the most dangerous direction. Soon, we will become the target of the Empire's army. Gather the troops. Head to the border. We have to stop the war outside the city." A Kingdom of Northland soldier was awakened by the pain. He subconsciously pushed away the corpse on top of him. His face was covered in blood, and there was a crossbow arrow in his body. He tried his best to recall what had just happened. Then, he seemed to recall something terrifying, and a look of fear appeared on his face. He tried to sit up, but found that there were corpses all around him. This place was like hell. Blood flowed like rivers, and corpses piled up like mountains. The air was filled with sulfur and the smell of rotting flesh. It made one want to vomit after taking a breath. Woo! Seeing the familiar faces lying on the ground in front of him and the burnt corpses of his comrades, the surviving German soldier cried in despair. Just as he was about to cry and stand up, a black shadow quickly descended from above his head, followed by the whistling sound of the wind. The soldier opened his eyes wide and raised his head to see a huge magic crystal bomb swooping down. Crack! Before the soldier could scream, the magic crystal bursting bullet tore him into two pieces. His two legs were sent flying far away while his upper body had been blasted into minced meat. The poor defenders of Northland Town didn't even have time to use their newly equipped crossbows before they were slaughtered by the Empire's Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Force. What was even more frightening was that they didn't even see the enemy's leader until they died. The ones who defeated these Northland defenders were only the vanguard of the Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Army and some magic crystal cannons. General Tyrone, the enemy's army has been destroyed. Several officers in charge of the vanguard command walked up to the leading general and threw a blood-stained Northland flag on the ground. Very good. General Tyrone glanced at the blood-stained flag on the ground and nodded with satisfaction. Those who defy the Empire must pay the price. After saying that, he stepped on the blood-stained flag with his iron boots and said impatiently, "The resistance here is simply courting death. I really don't want to waste a day here. I want to see when that gravel will come. I think they already know the news and the situation here. I'm afraid they won't dare to come anymore," an officer who looked like his deputy said with a cold smile. Tyrone looked at his deputy and said, "The only thing left now is to go to Gorgon and tell them who is the ruler of this place." However, in Gorgon, war horses were pulling all kinds of carriages in the same direction. The carriages were filled with fully armed Northland recruits. Their eyes were resolute, and they believed that they would win. Behind the carriages they were sitting in, there were all kinds of magic crystal cannons that trembled violently with the rolling of the wooden wheels. Under the wheels, the dust that was kicked up was scattered in the distance, and mixed with the dust that was kicked up by the other wheels, covering the sky and the sun. The Kingdom of Northland. Long live the Kingdom of Northland! With the orderly pace of the army, the commanders who held their swords shouted their slogans louder and louder. As their slogans ended, all the soldiers followed suit and shouted heroically, "The Kingdom of Northland! Long live the Kingdom of Northland!" Lord Horf, who was riding on a war horse, raised his chin and looked expressionlessly at his army leaving the camp. The same scene was happening in various cities of the Kingdom of Northland. Countless soldiers left their camps and shouted, "Long live the Kingdom of Northland!" Further north in these territories, the Northland flag fluttered in the wind. Countless soldiers left their camps and rushed to the gathering place. Within half a morning after the decision was made to send troops to the border, the Kingdom of Northland's troops stationed in various places moved out of their barracks. From this small detail, one could see how high the combat readiness of the Kingdom of Northland's troops was. The war behemoth that had been built with countless gold coins began to move at this moment. What was even more awe-inspiring was that the roar of this behemoth was enough to show everyone its might. This time, the warriors of the grasslands can finally launch an attack on the German Empire together. The envoy of the Kuruth Kingdom, who was in charge of the trade between the two countries, said with a smile. The Kingdom of Northland was not acting alone this time. After showing its strength to the Kuruth Kingdom of the Grasslands, it had also tied the Kuruth Kingdom to its war chariot. The two countries had signed a secret treaty long ago and formed an alliance. The Kuruth Kingdom of the Grasslands had always dreamed of revenge, so they were very supportive of the Kingdom of Northland's attack plan. They promised to provide troops when the Kingdom of Northland went south to help the Kingdom of Northland win the war against the German Empire. Not only that, according to the previous agreement with the Mercenary Association, the Kingdom of Northland had also formed an alliance with the Partheni Island, which had always claimed to be free and neutral. Therefore, in this expedition, the Partheni Islands Mercenary Association would also assist in attacking the German Empire. Chapter 207. Therefore, on the same day that the main forces of the Kingdom of Northland began to move south, the forces of the Karuk Kingdom also began to move south. 30,000 Northland soldiers, 50,000 grassland cavalrymen, and members of the Mercenary Association were on the ships of Partheni Island. From the moment the war broke out, it was destined to not be a local conflict. In King Gravel's plan, this war could at least be seen as a rehearsal for the destruction of the German Empire. We can't go out of the city to fight. The enemy has advanced so far in one day and one night, they must have something up their sleeves. If we take the risk to attack them now, if we win, they may have more reinforcements. If we lose, we will lose Rayleigh. Standing on top of the city wall, looking at the army holding the flag of the Empire in the distant plains, the officer of the garrison of Rayleigh Town, Raymond, held his sword and comforted his subordinates. Rayleigh Town was a new town under Gorgon. With the victory of the last expedition and the wealth brought back, this small town that was originally unknown was greatly developed. Now, it had become the largest town around the border with a newly built fortress. His voice seemed to have magical powers. After hearing his analysis, the soldiers who were ready to fight to the death with the enemy suppressed their thoughts of revenge and killing the enemy. Let our men rest. The enemy might not attack immediately, but we have to prepare our defenses. We can't afford to make any mistakes on the walls. Raymond was an experienced veteran who had been on the battlefield for a long time. He looked worriedly at the enemies in the distance who were not moving. He had to add to his subordinates. If the enemy enters the range of attack, use the catapults behind the walls to repel them. Raymond was very good at looking at the big picture. He knew that the expeditionary forces of Blackstone Fort could not last long. They wanted to take Rayleigh Town in one go, which was the best proof that they wanted to enter the town to resupply and avoid the upcoming battle. Therefore, as a frontline commander, what he needed to do was not to eliminate the enemy and gain credit. What he needed to do was to prevent the enemy from accomplishing their goal. As long as the enemy could not take down the city, the reinforcements of the Kingdom of Northland would definitely increase. He had already sent someone to inform King Gravel. When the time came, the enemy would only have one choice: retreat. Therefore, the current situation was very troublesome and complicated, but in Raymond's eyes, it was actually so simple that it made him feel a little bored. Boom! Just when Raymond felt a little bored, the expeditionary forces of Blackstone Fort in the distance showed their trump card. A magic explosive bullet pierced through the air with a sharp whistling sound and landed in Rayleigh Town. The magic bomb crashed into a house, smashed the roof tiles of the house, and then exploded in the house, knocking down 2 walls. Immediately after, the surrounding houses began to tremble and collapse, emitting a low and oppressive rumble. What is that? Redmond's eyes widened as he looked at the collapsed buildings behind him. Redmond's steady voice trembled as he asked his adjutant in disbelief. The adjutant was also shocked, speechless. He didn't have the mood to answer Redmond's question. He looked at the collapsing building, and the unforgettable explosion was still ringing in his ears. Boom! Before the two of them could recover from their shock, the second magic explosive bullet crashed into the walls of Rayleigh Town. The explosion caused the walls to crack, but the thick walls still stubbornly refused to fall. However, the soldiers on the city wall had already turned pale from the shock of the 2 consecutive explosions. They were not afraid of the enemies rushing to their feet, because they had too many ways to fight against the enemies who were besieging the city. But now, everything in front of them was beyond their understanding. Now, they didn't know what was happening, and the fear brought by ignorance was the real fear that went deep into their bones. Boom! Just like the bell of doomsday, the sound of the explosion was endless. The third explosion also occurred in the city. Another innocent building collapsed, and black smoke billowed out of it. By this time, Redmond had already recovered from his shock. He knew that the strategy he thought was foolproof seemed to have completely failed. The impenetrable walls seemed to be vulnerable in the eyes of the enemy. Could it be that these are the legendary magic crystal cannons? In the billowing smoke, Raymond stared at the Empire's flag and sighed. Hold the line. Retreat is not allowed. We are the brave warriors of the Northland. Death to us is like going home. Our ancestors are summoning us from the martyr's palace. He suddenly shouted to all the soldiers in front of him. His voice, to boost their morale, drifted far away in the gaps between the explosions. Boom! However, a few seconds later, an even more ferocious cannon fire completely suppressed the shouts from the top of Rayleigh Town. The Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Army below the town had gathered almost all of their magic crystal cannons. The power of a volley of cannon fire was not something that could be resisted by mere mortals. Rumble! After another round of fire aimed at the city wall, the thick city wall of Rayleigh finally collapsed in the explosion. The battlements tumbled down the walls, and the corpses of the soldiers on the walls were also buried in the smoke and debris. Seeing that there was a gap in his walls, Raymond knew that this defensive battle was destined to be difficult. He knew that sometimes soldiers had to face the worst outcome calmly. A towering catapult was torn apart by the shockwave of the explosion. Countless wooden supports collapsed and shattered. The soldiers under the catapult were already in a mess. A huge wooden lever smashed into another catapult next to it, making a creaking sound. After 3 volleys of cannon fire, the scene in Rayleigh Town was like the end of the world. Sir, the enemy did not surround us. Let's retreat to the north. Raymond's adjutant's face was covered in smoke and dust. He pulled Raymond's arm and urged loudly. It couldn't be helped. After a few rounds of bombardment, everyone's voices on the battlefield would become incomparably loud. Because they were already used to that kind of deafening environment, their ears had long become less sensitive. Chapter 208. This adjutant's armor was no longer shiny, and one could even see some splashes of blood on it. The enemy was still a few miles away, but the defenders on the city walls had already suffered heavy losses. The explosion just now had caused them to lose hundreds of men, and hundreds of others suffered light injuries. If not for the protection of the armor, the soldiers would have suffered even greater losses. The most important thing was not the loss of these soldiers, but the defense of Rayleigh Town, which was almost completely destroyed. Clang! Raymond drew his sword from his waist, pushed away the adjutant who was hugging his arm, and ordered loudly, "Reserves! Follow me to the collapsed city walls. Line up. Prepare for battle. The enemy should be here soon. We don't have much time left." The soldiers behind him also unsheathed their swords. Raymond had a lot of prestige in Rayleigh Town, so at this crucial moment, there were many people who were willing to stand up and support this admirable officer. If the Empire dares to charge, I will show them what I've got. I'll let them know what a cruel war is. Raymond stubbornly raised his sword and stood on the city wall. Behind him, the broken flag of the Kingdom of Northland was still stubbornly struggling in the black smoke. But soon, the black mass of the Empire's soldiers rushed over like a tide. Brothers, let these bastards of the Empire see how we, the Northland people, fight. Raymond roared angrily and shot an arrow at the enemy from the city walls. The arrow flew out and hit the head of one of the Empire's soldiers, and the soldier of the Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Force fell to the ground. For a moment, on the broken city walls, the archers and crossbowmen of the Northland crazily shot at the Empire soldiers. As long as they were still breathing, they used all their remaining strength to kill the enemy. Raymond saw that the enemy was very close, so he went down the city walls and prepared to lead the rest of the soldiers to the broken city walls. He was ready to go all out against the black mass of Empire soldiers. The enemy's heavy cavalry of the Blackstone Fort wore armor with a coat of arms, and Lord Tyrant's coat of arms was a flag with a white upper half and a green lower half. The two halves of the flag each had a picture of a cat of the opposite color. These Blackstone Fort's heavy cavalry were fully armed and had excellent equipment. The reason why Lord Tylun didn't use them as the vanguard was because he was confident in this battle. He didn't want to lose any heavy cavalry. Tai Luan believed that he could crush these small border cities easily. Moreover, he didn't know how long it would take for the reinforcements from the empire's royal family to arrive. Therefore, he was trying his best to minimize the losses of his elite core forces because he knew that the real battle was coming. Even though Tyrone had brought a lot of magic bombs with him this time, he still wanted to use them sparingly. After all, they would need these things to influence the outcome of the war in the future. He also knew that Gravel also had these things in his hands, so he needed to suppress him with numbers. Therefore, to deal with a small place like Rayleigh, they only needed to break through the enemy's defensive structures and leave the rest to the Empire's infantry in Blackstone Fort. Shield wall! Shield wall! Redmond roared at the remaining Norseland defenders. Therefore, the rest of the well-trained soldiers immediately formed a shield wall formation with strong defensive power. This formation was made up of every Northland soldier's shield next to each other, forming a human wall. Following the orderly battle cries of the Northland soldiers, the enemy had already approached the gap in the city wall. The Empire's infantry were also unusually brave. They were the soldiers of Blackstone Fort, so they were on a completely different level compared to the city guards. A fierce battle had already begun. The Empire's Blackstone Fort soldiers wielding spears and the Northland soldiers wielding wooden shields and one-handed longswords were actually neck and neck. After all, the Northland defenders' weapons were shorter, so they didn't have an advantage. The Empire's weapons were longer spears, but they were helpless against the Northland soldiers' shields and iron barrel-like defense. On the other hand, the Northland archers on the city wall shot arrows with all their might, killing many of the Empire soldiers. However, at the same time, they were also killed by the crossbow-wielding Empire soldiers. For a moment, the battlefield was a bit of a stalemate. Seeing this, the Empire's heavy cavalry charged towards the Northland defenders through a path that the Empire's infantry had opened up. In an instant, the Empire's heavy cavalry charged towards the Northland defenders' shield wall and crushed it. In just a moment, the Northland shield wall was broken apart by the Empire's heavy cavalry. In a moment, with the addition of the Empire's spearmen, the scattered Northland soldiers could only fight on their own. Raymond held a shield in one hand and a sword in the other, slashing at the Empire's soldiers who rushed in. He used a shield to block an Empire soldier's spear, then nimbly closed in and slashed the soldier's neck with his sharp sword. The Empire soldier threw away the spear in his hand and tried to stop the blood from flowing out of his neck with both hands, but it was futile. He fell to the ground and didn't move anymore. The remaining Northland soldiers fought with their lives on the line. Their faces were covered in blood, some of it from the enemy, some of it from themselves. The sharp swords were a little blunt, and when the swords were blunt, they used their shields to smash the enemy's helmet. Taking advantage of the moment when the enemy was unconscious, the cold swords pierced the enemy's weak points. Of course, there were also Northland soldiers who were killed by the combined forces of the Empire soldiers. Some were shot in the back by the enemy's crossbow, and some were pierced by the enemy's spearmen. They were all brave warriors, waiting for the call of God Oracle. Tonight, their spirits would be able to drink and drink with the heroes in the Havagard Shrine to celebrate. They had died bravely in battle and would return to the embrace of God. After Raymond killed about 10 more Empire soldiers, he was shot in the leg by a German Empire crossbowman in the distance. He was in so much pain that he knelt down. At this time, a captain of the heavy cavalry saw him and took out a rope and tied it around Raymond's neck. Raymond's vision was blurred by the blood, and he immediately urged his horse to speed up. Just like that, Raymond was dragged far away, his blood forming a long trail on the ground. The others were also surrounded. They had no hope, and they didn't fear death. Raymond didn't die, but he was being dragged away by the enemy's knights. The pain filled him with hatred, and he hated these Empire bastards. Chapter 209. At the same time, on the plains in the distance, a large army was marching towards Rayleigh. Dong! Dong, dong, dong. The sound of the war drums seemed to be beating on the hearts of the people, making it difficult to breathe. The flag of King Gravel fluttered in the sky, and rows of soldiers walked down the hill, marching into the distance. King Gravel sat on his warhorse, looking at the black mass of Northland soldiers walking past him, his heart filled with pride. The warhorse under him was shaking its head and snorting, and the carved armor on his body was heavy and hard, which made him feel very comfortable, very comfortable. The army in front of him was vast and endless, and King Gravel had brought almost all the troops that the Kingdom of Northland could mobilize, which added up to more than 30,000 people. Accompanied by the majestic drums and the sound of horns, huge phalanxes were slowly moving forward. In between these phalanxes that were moving forward slowly, there was a long and thin passage like a wheat field, and the cavalry in charge of communication was riding back and forth. Even in the eyes of outsiders, the army of Northland in front of him was definitely an elite division with strict discipline. King Gravel had such an army, and with reinforcements from the Guild of Mercenaries on Partheni Island and the Kuruth Kingdom on the plains, he was confident that he would not be defeated. Whoa! Lord Horf was wearing the same armor, and he held his reins in front of King Gravel and said loudly, "Your Majesty, Rayleigh is just ahead. Do you want the troops to assemble first?" Ahem. King Gravel cleared his throat, and he did not feel that his army needed to wait. He waved his hand and ordered his men, "Order the troops in front to form a phalanx and wait for orders. The troops behind continue to move forward. Just maintain the formation." What a joke. Tens of thousands of Northland troops, plus the advanced technology from the Empire. Even if the opponent's commander had the guts of iron, he would not dare to go against his army. Whoosh! A gust of wind blew, and the grass rippled in the wind. The soldiers in gray steel armor walked up the distant hillside step by step. "Your Majesty, I heard that they're already reorganizing their formation. Let's go." Horf pulled his reins, turned his horse around, and began rushing forward. The cavalry on both sides of King Gravel also began to move forward. The ground was trampled by countless horse hooves, producing a dull thud. The cavalrymen who held the flag held it tightly in their hands. The Northland flag was pulled apart by the wind and fluttered in the wind. It was a pleasing sight. King Gravel rode on the horse's back. He clamped the horse's belly with his legs and pulled the reins to let the horse move forward. A huge drum chariot pulled by several war horses was right behind King Gravel. The drummers on it were still beating the war drums that were as tall as humans in front of them tirelessly. The dull drum beats that excited King Gravel were the result of their hammering. King Gravel, who was slowly moving forward on his horse, observed his army with the eyes of a leader. As they advanced, the infantrymen, archers, and cavalry on both sides maintained a very orderly formation. The whole army moved without any noise. Even the footsteps of these soldiers were accompanied by the beat of the drums. There was not the slightest bit of disorder, no matter how one looked at it. The army in front of him was an impeccable and strong opponent. The most elite troops of the Kingdom of Northland, including the most powerful combat power of the two lords, coupled with the newly expanded army. This lineup could definitely completely wipe out the enemies who came to harass Blackstone Fort. It would be unreasonable if they still could not win. That was what King Gravel thought in his heart. He knew that each of these soldiers were carefully selected veterans, and their combat power had always been very strong. The rest of the troops were also newly trained elites, and each of them was a qualified soldier who had undergone strict training. Just as King Gravel was feeling proud of his invincible army, a huge shadow blocked the sun above his head. It was as if a dark cloud had covered the sky above his head. Roar! A deafening roar even covered the sound of the giant drums. A huge airship flew over King Gravel's head, and with an indomitable momentum, it climbed higher into the sky in the distance. Then, before King Gravel could catch his breath, a second airship swept past the marching formation of the Northland Army, and many soldiers looked up in fear. This airship was larger than the one that flew past, and looked even more terrifying. Then, the third and fourth airships glided across the ground, and all the soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland were excited to see them. Although these airships were not very fast and did not fly particularly high, these airships were no longer a privilege of the Empire, and they gave the soldiers of the Northland a firm morale and unparalleled courage. Your Majesty, our vanguard has collided with the Empire's army that is currently entrenched in Rayleigh Town. These despicable bastards. At this moment, an officer walked over to King Gravel and reported the latest situation. What's wrong? King Gravel looked at the officer and choked up. They threw all the defenders of Rayleigh Town onto the city walls, and their bodies were badly mutilated. Our soldiers in front saw it with their own eyes. The officer said with tears in his eyes, "Let the vanguard attack. We must avenge our fallen brothers." King Gravel clenched his fist and ordered, "Your Majesty, should we use the magic crystal cannons to attack the walls of Rayleigh Town first?" The officer said. King Gravel had the same thought, and he immediately ordered, "Advance. Let the magic crystal cannons aim at Rayleigh Town first." Upon hearing his order, the flag bearers standing beside him began to wave the large flags in their hands and gave the order to attack to each formation. At the forefront, the formation of the Kingdom of Northland had already formed an attack formation, and the formation in the middle began to move forward again. After a few steps, the formations on both sides of the formation in the middle began to move forward. Soon, the newly formed magic crystal cannons were aimed at the enemy's walls not far away. Under the heavy beating of the drums, the formation of infantry also began to move forward slowly, and the gray armor rippled. The sound of metal clashing against metal was refreshing. Soon, this formation would be able to wipe out the enemy, take back the city, and destroy the expeditionary force of Blackstone Fort. "Now I'm here, commander of Blackstone Fort. Let's see how you defeat my invincible army." King Gravel pulled the reins and urged his horse forward, bringing his guards to a hillside where they could overlook the entire battlefield. Chapter 210. On the hillside, King Gravel had a bird's-eye view of Rayleigh Town. He discovered that the German Empire's Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Force had occupied Rayleigh Town with tens of thousands of soldiers. Rayleigh Town was a small town with a small population. The Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Force had turned the town into a military fortress. Gravel also discovered that most of the defensive structures at the south gate of Rayleigh Town had been damaged. It seemed that the Empire had broken in from there. Not only that, but Gravel also saw the thing that he didn't want to see the most, which was the magic crystal cannons. The number of magic crystal cannons was greater than the number of magic crystal cannons they had. Although he was already making preparations, the enemy's sudden attack had greatly affected his original plan of expanding his army. His army had no choice but to go to the front lines. This was probably the biggest war that the Norland Kingdom had ever fought since it was founded. Both the enemy and their allies had almost brought out their families. This time, King Gravel had great confidence in the modified airships that were put into use for the first time. Of these 4 airships, one of them was seized from the Empire at Primordium Port. The remaining 3 were replicated by almost all the mechanics and craftsmen of the Kingdom of Northland. This included Kelvin of the Demon Hunter's Blade in Bauhinia Manor in Grizzly Town. After countless days and nights of research, these craftsmen finally replicated a larger and more powerful experimental airship. Although it eventually crashed in countless tests, the Kingdom of Northland still mastered the ability to replicate and modify airships. Now, the other 3 airships were the new models. The Kingdom of Northland built airships that were larger than the Empire's. Even the magic crystal cannons that were replicated were larger than the Empire's. Not only that, the craftsmen of the Empire had also added some secret weapons to these airships to make them even more powerful. Gravel knew that the time for the decisive battle had come. They were going to fight it out with the Empire. Blackstone Fort, this barrier that had been unsurpassable for many years, now actually took the initiative to come to their doorstep. It was simply courting death. While Gravel was still thinking about how to wipe out the Empire's expeditionary force in the town of Rayleigh. "This guy is the enemy's commander?" Tyrone looked at Raymond, who was covered in blood. Raymond was tied up. Previously, he had been dragged away by the Empire's heavy cavalry captain. Now, he was tied up and brought to Tyrone. Raymond was covered in blood, and his consciousness was fading. Many of the corpses of the Northland soldiers who died in battle were hung on the walls of Rayleigh Town. Most of the men in the town were slaughtered, and the rest who surrendered were locked up in a huge farmhouse. The Northland women were captured by the Empire's soldiers. The elderly and children were all killed and thrown outside the city to feed the crows. Most of the captured women were relatively young. They were arranged in an open area. The Imperial soldiers who were working hard on the expedition lined up in the open area and started some intense exercise. After working hard for so long, they could finally have some fun. Every Imperial soldier was waiting for their turn. Everywhere, the screams of the Northland women and the wretched laughter of the Imperial soldiers could be heard. When war came, the ones who suffered the most would always be the ordinary civilians and the weak. However, it was a feast for the strong. Almost all of the Northland soldiers died bravely in battle. They drank and chatted with their ancestors in the Martyr's Palace. Raymond was the only one left who couldn't die. Raymond, who was tortured until he was no longer human, was brought to see Tyrone. Yes, we have confirmed this guy. The Northland soldiers who surrendered told us that he is indeed the commander of this town. An officer reported to Lord Tyrone. Tyrone looked at the corpses of the Imperial soldiers that were being carried to be buried at the entrance of the town. He actually admired Raymond a little. In a situation where he was alone and the enemy outnumbered him by several times, he was able to calmly command his troops. Furthermore, none of his soldiers were willing to retreat, and all of them died in battle. If it wasn't for the fact that his cavalry captain managed to capture him alive, Redmond would probably have died a heroic death. Are you willing to surrender? I can give you a chance to live. Tyrone asked the unconscious Raymond in the German language. Damn it, Imperial bastards. I can't wait to kill all of you. Ha! I can see God all-eager opening his arms to me. I can also go to the Martyr's Palace with the martyrs. Raymond replied loudly in the Northland language. His laughter made Tyrone's heart tremble involuntarily. Tyrone waved his hand and ordered the officer to execute Raymond. At this time, another officer came to report that a large number of enemy reinforcements were coming from the north of the town. Some of the soldiers on the town walls had already started fighting with the enemy. This officer also reported that the enemy had sent 4 airships flying towards Rayleigh Town. They still have airships. This news made Tyrone a little shocked. He really didn't know that the enemy had not only successfully seized the Imperial airships, but also successfully replicated a few of them. Hopefully, they still don't know how to use these airships to their fullest potential. Tyrone comforted himself. He temporarily put aside the internal matters of Rayleigh Town and focused on dealing with the real enemy outside the town. He knew that the upcoming battle would be extremely fierce. He ordered the officer to gather all the Imperial soldiers and put everyone into a state of war. Now is not the time to celebrate. These Northland people came really fast. They didn't even give people a chance to breathe. Since they want to die, I'll fulfill their wishes. Tyrone muttered to himself. After he finished speaking, the corner of his mouth rose into a slight smile. Raymond was taken away by the Imperial soldiers. They didn't have time to kill this cripple. After they dealt with the enemy outside the town, they would slowly torture these people to death. Wouldn't that be more interesting? Raymond was imprisoned in a cow pen in an abandoned farmhouse. An Imperial soldier was responsible for looking after him. Outside Rayleigh Town, King Gravel's men, Lord Horf, and Lord Bethman's men were gathered there. They were preparing for a full-scale siege. In fact, they wanted to take a detour to the south gate. This was because the fortifications there were the weakest. When the Imperial soldiers attacked the town, they blew up a huge gap. Over there, as long as they put in a little effort and sent people to attack the town, they should be able to quickly kill their way into the town. However, if this was the case, would the Imperial soldiers let them take a detour to the south gate? The Imperial soldiers weren't fools. They would definitely send soldiers to stop them. It seemed that a tough battle was inevitable. Chapter 211. Prepare for battle. Facing an enemy several times his size, the captain of the Delman Empire's Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Army wasn't intimidated at all. Instead, he was filled with anticipation for victory. His soldiers had already formed 3 lines in front of the countless enemy soldiers. They did not retreat, nor did they show any signs of panic. They just checked the weapons in their hands and prepared to give the enemy a big gift later. The enemy is approaching. Prepare for battle. The captain commanded the battle. He wanted to prove himself and win the victory in front of him. All the soldiers raised their weapons in front of the sea of people. They calmly picked up the weapons in their hands and waited for the enemy to approach before charging fiercely. When the enemy was about 300 meters away, the crossbowman in his camp fired arrows from the city wall at the Northland soldiers who wanted to go to the south gate to attack the city. Dozens of soldiers from the Kingdom of Northland on the opposite side fell in an instant. The other party was actually able to shoot arrows from such a long distance and knock down his own soldiers. The Norland Kingdom's attacks became sharper and sharper. More and more of the Norland Kingdom's soldiers fell on the way. Press on. Let the cavalry at the back press on. Press on. King Gravel loudly gave the order to continue the attack. Under his command, more soldiers from the Kingdom of Northland began to rush towards the gap in the south of the city. The continuous sound of the bugle horn represented the determination of the Kingdom of Northland. I suggest that we attack immediately and let the airships destroy this army. They are still here, so there must be reinforcements behind them. If we let them meet up, it may be more troublesome. Horf suggested to Gravel. You are right. Gravel nodded and agreed with his opinion. Go. Bring victory back to me. Let the airships move out. Be careful. Don't mess up. You guys are too weak. The captain of the German Empire's Blackstone Fort Expeditionary Army muttered as he led the heavy cavalry to charge towards the brave Northland soldiers. The Northland soldiers beat their war drums loudly, but their troops were still far from the south gate. Then, in the next second, on the opposite slope behind the distant hills, a huge shadow suddenly rose into the air. All the soldiers of the Empire's Expeditionary Army widened their eyes as they watched the shadow soar into the sky. Another black shadow rose into the air from the reverse slope. Then a third and a fourth shadow rose. These shadows were about a few thousand meters away, so the German soldiers could easily see them hovering in the sky. It's the airships, one of the soldiers shouted in a trembling voice. He could feel his legs and stomach trembling. Even his hands that were holding onto his weapon were trembling uncontrollably. Continue to fight. The captain of the cavalry was the first to regain his senses. He drew his sword from his waist and cheered for his subordinates loudly. Long live the German Empire! Long live Lord Tyran! Victory for the German Empire! All the soldiers began to attack the soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland, who were charging towards them like a tidal wave. However, an airship in the sky rushed down from the clouds and threw cans of kerosene at the soldiers of the German Empire. The crossbowmen on the city walls and towers were ready to fight to the death. First, it was black hot oil. Then it was fire. This ball of fire continued to fall like a falling meteorite towards the German soldiers in the city. The German crossbowmen who saw the flames above their heads closed their eyes in despair and pulled the trigger of their crossbows. Because of the sunlight and the fireballs, they could not see their targets. They could only fire hastily. In the next second, the ball of fire smashed into the crowd. Hundreds of German Empire soldiers screamed in agony as they struggled in the sea of fire. Then, they were turned into charcoal and collapsed in the flames. Help! After all, the soldiers of the German Empire were made of flesh and blood. They had relied on advanced weapons to achieve their success. In terms of courage and perseverance, they were not much better than the soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland. Therefore, when the real test of blood and fire arrived, the soldiers of the German Empire collapsed. They saw their comrades turn into ashes and charcoal. They were burned by the flames and twisted until they died. They were terrified. The flames swept across the ground, causing the soil to harden and heat up. An airship flew over at a low altitude. It seemed that all living things would be turned into charcoal. In the face of these powerful and mysterious ancient technologies, humans were insignificant and helpless from the beginning to the end. The few remaining soldiers of the German Empire were still holding their weapons in despair. They had already struggled out of the initial chaos and despair because they had seen too much death. They kept waving their weapons around aimlessly, as if this was the only way to vent the fear in their hearts. The soldiers of the Kingdom of Northland, who were getting closer and closer to them, stopped because there were flames rising in front of them. The enemy is right above us. All soldiers, prepare for battle. The officer of the German Empire who was commanding the magic crystal cannons held the long sword at his waist and ordered his subordinates. Following his orders, the soldiers in charge of firing the magic crystal cannons began to adjust the magic crystal cannons so that they could aim at the airships that were moving slowly. The cannons were raised bit by bit, and the cold barrels were pointed at the airships flying in the sky. Let's hope that our magic crystal cannons can really destroy those damn airships. The commander of the magic crystal cannons of the German Empire stood at the commanding point of the tower on the city wall and held his long sword nervously. He looked at the airships of the Kingdom of Northland that were wreaking havoc in the sky. An airship dropped a can of kerosene from the sky and bombarded the magic crystal cannons of the German Empire on the city wall. In an instant, this section of the city wall was engulfed in flames, and the soldiers on it were also drowned in a sea of fire. Boom! The remaining magic crystal cannons of the German Empire also opened fire. A huge cannonball flew into the sky and shattered the armor of one of the airships. It then drilled into the interior of the airship. The cannonball's momentum did not diminish, and it penetrated the entire airship. The entire airship lost its balance and fell from the sky, smashing into the city wall that was still burning with flames. Chapter 2:12. On the other side, within the borders of the German Empire, an important fortress in the north, Blackstone Fort. Yawning loudly, the Blackstone Fort guards at the border looked towards the direction of the rising sun with sleepy eyes. The sunlight was so dazzling that he could not help but squint his eyes and look away. But soon, he realized something and looked at the eastern horizon again. Hey, wake up. He used his hand to block the sunlight and looked into the distance while kicking his companion. Soldiers of the Kurut Kingdom. So many soldiers of the Kurut Kingdom. Why are you kicking me? Soldiers of the Kurut Kingdom? Why would they come to the border at this time? Another sleeping soldier struggled to stand up, his armor clanking against each other. What Kurut Kingdom soldiers did you say? Damn it. Sound the alarm. The Kurut Kingdom is attacking. Rubbing his eyes and looking in the direction his companion pointed, the soldier who had just been woken up was no longer sleepy and shouted loudly. Light the fire. Quick! The Kurut Kingdom is invading. Immediately, he lay on the edge of the watchtower and shouted to his companions below, Light the fire! Quick! Rain of arrows. Before anyone could react, a volley of arrows flew over from the Kurut Kingdom. These arrows fell from the sky and landed on the high watchtower. Caught off guard, a soldier with arrows stuck in his body struggled to flip off the watchtower. Where he fell, the soldiers of Blackstone Fort poured a bucket of black kerosene on the firewood. Shields! Shields! Kicking away the arrows stuck in the ground, the officer in charge of the watchtower drew his sword and raised his huge shield, reminding his men loudly. The cavalry of the Kurut Kingdom had already swarmed over, their numbers like ants. After serving here for 3 years, this was the first time the officer of Blackstone Fort had seen so many soldiers of the Kurut Kingdom. It's over. That was the thought in his mind. Beside him, a huge fire had been lit, and the enemy's second volley of arrows had fallen. All the soldiers raised their shields. Bang! The soldiers of the Kurut Kingdom carrying the giant logs began to slam into the gates of the beacon towers. The soldiers on the towers gripped their weapons in horror. The enemy's sudden attack left them with no chance to retreat. When the soldiers of the Kuruth kingdom rushed in, they could only welcome death. We can't let them extinguish the fire. Long live the German Empire. Long live Blackstone Fort. Looking at the crumbling door, the officer raised his sword. Kill! A few lone soldiers beside him raised their shields and blocked the stone stairs leading up to the beacon tower. Their sharp swords were pointed at the door. Boom! With a loud bang, the gate of the beacon tower was finally smashed open by the giant log. The soldiers of the Kuruth duchy swarmed in. What greeted them were sturdy shields and sharp swords. Metal clashed against metal, and the first few Kurutian soldiers who rushed up the stairs screamed as they fell down. More Kurutian soldiers rushed up with weapons in hand. The Blackstone Fort guards fell one by one, and the rest had no choice but to retreat to the top of the stairs. Behind them, the flames of the beacon had reached the clouds and covered the sky. In the direction of the battlements of the beacon tower, the soldiers of the Kuruth kingdom had already climbed up and surrounded the few remaining Blackstone Fort guards. Soon, the soldiers of the Kuruth kingdom drowned their opponents. When Seru Khan climbed up the tower, the blood on it had yet to dry. The corpse of the Blackstone Fort officer was still lying beside the fire, and the ground was covered with arrows that had not been retrieved. Kicking the corpse, Seru Khan had a look of disdain on his face. Extinguish this fire. Hurry! Behind him, in the direction of the Blackstone Fort, black pillars of smoke extended into the distance and disappeared into the horizon. Speed up the march. Don't give the German Empire any time to react. Seru Khan lowered his head and looked at the corpse of the Blackstone Fort officer, frowning as he ordered. Alonso pushed open the door of the meeting hall with a furious expression. Because he used too much force, the two doors slammed into the walls on both sides with a loud bang. He was wearing black armor, and the armor plates on his body clashed together with his firm footsteps, making a pleasant clattering sound. The Kuruth kingdom actually came to our doorstep to die. As soon as he entered, his angry voice reverberated in the high beams, causing everyone's ears to buzz. Seru Khan is greedy and treacherous. He's declared war on us without declaring war. His troops crossed the border yesterday, and he's probably at the northern edge of the German Empire today. An adjutant beside him said worriedly to Alonso, "Marshal, we've already readied our troops. 5,000 cavalry and 20,000 elite soldiers are ready to set off at any time." One of Alonso's subordinates, a general from the William family, stood beside Alonso with a helmet and reported the situation. "Set off immediately. We'll block the enemy at the northern edge of the German Empire and have a decisive battle. There, we'll be able to use our advantage in firepower. Everything's in chaos. Even the Kuruth kingdom has taken the initiative to invade, and they've taken advantage of the empty Blackstone Fort." Alonso looked at the map and made up his mind to stop the enemy. Although the enemy had the advantage in numbers, Alonso was still confident that he could defeat them. Now he was thinking about how to quickly expand the victory after defeating the enemy. Let the Imperial Army not participate in the battle. Order the Imperial Army to take 20 magic crystal cannons and bypass the main forces of the Kuruth kingdom. They'll directly attack the capital of the Kuruth kingdom, Larma. After thinking for a second, Alonso decided to attack from both sides. He had no time to waste. While defeating the enemy, he could seize the enemy's rear to expand his territory and solve any future problems. This was the more reasonable way to fight the battle. However, this way, Alonso would have fewer troops to face Seru Khan head-on. Even if the soldiers who retreated from the Kuruth kingdom were included, Alonso's troops would not exceed 30,000. The enemy's numbers were nearly double that of Alonso's. This battle did not seem to have any suspense. It was not impossible to win a battle with fewer troops, but it rarely happened. "My lord, splitting the troops in this situation, isn't it a little risky?" The general from the William family asked worriedly. "Is using 20 magic crystal cannons to defeat the enemy considered risky?" Alonso looked at the general and revealed a cruel smile. "I'm afraid that they'll surrender too early, and not enough time for me to vent my anger Chapter 213. That's the plan. I will personally lead my soldiers to the northern border of the German Empire and fight Seru Khan. You will lead a surprise attack on the Kuruth kingdom, once and for all. Yes, my lord. The general clenched his right fist and pressed it against his chest as he bowed his head in response. Long live the German Empire! A day later, Alonso led nearly 30,000 imperial soldiers and met up with a few thousand retreating soldiers on the outskirts of the German Empire. They blocked the only path from Blackstone Castle to Kellendal. That afternoon, Seru Khan led nearly 50,000 grassland cavalrymen and 10,000 infantrymen and appeared in the distance from Alonso's camp. As it was already late, both sides had no intention of fighting that day. Alonso sent someone to deliver a letter to Seru Khan, condemning his despicable actions of starting a war without declaring war. In the end, Seru Khan replied with a letter of his own, demanding that Alonso surrender immediately and hand over all his wealth and territory. Of course, both sides would not call a truce just like that. They would only rest and reorganize themselves in preparation for the final battle. Early the next morning, Alonso led his soldiers out of his camp, ready to fight to the death with Seru Khan. Seru Khan also intended to finish the battle in one fell swoop. He led his main infantry and all his cavalry, setting up a formation 3 leagues away from Alonso's army. Dong, dong, dong. The dull sound of war drums beat on everyone's chests, causing the air to thicken and making it difficult to breathe. War banners fluttered in the wind, and the dense cavalry stood before Alonso like a forest. The dart patterns on Alonso's armor twined around, exquisite and exquisite as they shimmered with a cold light. The warhorse under him snorted restlessly, and its bowl-sized hooves kept stomping on the ground. We have too little infantry, less than 25,000 men. We can't let the enemy attack. Otherwise, we won't have the capital to deal with them. Alonso planned his next tactic in his heart, his fingers tapping lightly on the hilt of his sword. This was a habit of his. Every time he was thinking, he liked to tap his fingers on a hard object. The 5,000 cavalry he had were to counterattack and clean up the battlefield. They could not easily join the battle at this time. Thus, he did not have the capital to exhaust the enemy. He could only rely on firepower to defeat the enemy, quickly turning the battle into a one-sided pursuit. Give the order. The magic crystal cannoneers loaded the magic explosive shells and got ready to fire. Wait for my order. As Alonso thought of this, he turned sideways and ordered a messenger beside him. The messenger pulled the reins and immediately went off to relay Alonso's order. At this moment, on the horizon, the phalanx of the Kuruth kingdom began to move forward slowly to the accompaniment of the war drums. My lord, the enemy's army's army, a phalanx of 20,000 is child's play. A general of the Kuruth kingdom rode up to Seru Khan and reported loudly. Khan Seru Khan's right. Seru, the enemy's forces were so low that they could not support the defensive line. No matter how many schemes there were, whether they were attacking from behind or from the side, they had to maintain a certain number of troops to withstand the enemy's attacks. Alonso's army was pitifully low. It was impossible to maintain a frontal defense. Seru Khan only needed to attack once to break through the enemy's defensive line. In this situation, there was no need to think about defending the flanks or the rear. Ha ha ha! Seru Khan pointed with his horsewhip in the direction of the Imperial army and said proudly to the general beside him, "It's like the commander of the Imperial army has never fought before. He can't even withstand a single blow. Let the cavalry attack. The cavalry will crush them, and we'll win this battle." The general suggested with a smile. No. Seru Khan waved his hand as if he was devising a strategy. His expression became even more arrogant. He still has cavalry on the flanks. I won't take the risk. Give the order. All troops advance. I'm different from this brat who likes to use schemes. I'll charge head-on. Invulnerable. Let's see what he can do. Ha ha! Seru Khan rejected his general's suggestion and ordered himself. Behind him, the war drums beat even more rapidly. The Kuruth army began to move forward one after another. At this moment, he heard the sound of thunder resounding through the sky. At this moment, he did not realize that the thunder came from hell and could devour life. A magical explosive bomb landed in the middle of the Kuruth cavalry formation. The explosion sent debris and shrapnel flying, cutting into the bodies of the warhorses and the soldiers. It was a bloody storm. The warhorses neighed in the explosion. All the Kuruth cavalry looked in the direction of the explosion in horror, not knowing what had happened. Next, the second explosion also sounded among the cavalry, and thick smoke billowed into the sky. The shrapnel turned into a hurricane that swept through everyone nearby, piercing through everything that stood in its way. A knight whose leg had been cut off by the explosion fell from his warhorse and let out a heart-wrenching scream. Unfortunately, his scream was drowned out by the third explosion, and no one noticed. Next, more explosions bloomed in the Kuruth army. In an instant, the Kuruth flag was thrown to the side. The soldiers covered their heads and fled. The knee formation was no more. Before Sarukagan could react, the second volley of magic bombs whistled through the air. The noise, more terrifying than the snoring of a demon, once again reverberated above the Kuruth army. Boom! A magical explosive bomb exploded not far behind Sarukan, sending the war drums and his guards flying. The flagpole of his family's flag was shattered by the explosion, and the broken pieces of the flag slowly drifted to the ground. The blade-like air waves caused Sarukagan's warhorse to whinny in pain. Sarukagan used all his strength to stabilize his horse. He then raised his head and looked around. His cavalry formation was in chaos. The warhorses and the knights were fleeing in all directions. His infantry formation was in disarray and had suffered heavy losses. The huge explosion formed a terrible crater. Around the crater, there were broken limbs and corpses scattered everywhere. Further away, the injured soldiers held their wounds and screamed. The uninjured soldiers stared at the people around them, not knowing what to do. They tried their best to yell and recover their hearing. Chapter 214. 3 cavalry formations and more than 10,000 Kuruth soldiers were easily destroyed by the roar of the magic crystal cannons. Boom! The third round of cannon fire landed in the middle of the Kuruth army. Alonso, who had no intention of conserving his ammunition, ordered the cannoneers to reload with magic explosive shells. This round of explosions finally woke up the disoriented Kuruth soldiers. They threw down their weapons and began to flee. No matter how hard the officers tried, they could not gather them together. They have mages! A soldier pushed down the officer who tried to stop him from retreating and shouted hysterically. The German Empire has mages protecting them. You're sending us to our deaths. Stepping over the officer on the ground, the fleeing soldier found a good excuse for his desertion without even turning his head back. Unfortunately, the officer behind him did not have the chance to listen to his explanation because the fleeing soldier stepped directly on the chest of the unlucky officer. Boom! Amidst the fleeing crowd, explosions rang out one after another, cruel and cold. Alonso looked at the black smoke rising from the plains in the distance. He reined in the reins of his warhorse and calculated the time to counterattack. This battle made him feel as if all the blood in his body was boiling. Stop the cannon fire! After 3 rounds of magic explosive shells, Alonso stopped tapping his fingers on the hilt of his sword. He saw that the enemy was beginning to crumble, so he ordered them to stop wasting magic shells. Stop firing and wait for my order. Alonso urged his horse to gallop towards the cavalry formation on the flank while he ordered the messenger beside him. Clang! Coming to the front of the cavalry formation, Alonso drew his sword and raised it to the blue sky. His powerful voice drifted into the distance. The German Empire is invincible. William's army is invincible. The German Empire is invincible. William's army is invincible. Beside him, nearly 5,000 knights in black armor broke the silence. They raised the spears in their hands, the tip of the spears reflecting a dazzling light under the sun. Attack! Alonso pulled his horse's head and slashed forward with his sword. He He squeezed the horse's belly with his legs and jumped down the gentle slope ahead. Kill! Nearly 5,000 cavalrymen roared at the same time and followed behind their lord, urging their horses forward. This victory came too easily, and the destructive explosion stimulated every soldier of the empire. They now firmly believed that the person they were following was undefeatable. They believed that Alonso could bring them victory. The horse's hooves hit the ground, and its black armor rose and fell with the movement of the warhorse. Just as the soldiers of the Kurut kingdom were about to collapse, Alonso led 5,000 cavalrymen into their ranks. No one organized a defensive line to stop the German Empire's cavalry from breaking through. The power that the cavalry displayed when chasing down the rebels could only be described as unparalleled. Alonso swept past a group of disorderly soldiers, cutting down a Kuruth soldier with a single slash. He hacked at the flesh of the Kuruth soldiers with his sword, ending a man's life with his own hands. The cavalrymen behind him were all covered in blood as they trampled and crushed one Kuruth soldier after another. This was a massacre, a one-sided massacre that had long been predestined. Kneel and surrender, and you will be spared. Alonso, who was already in the midst of the chaos of the Kuruth kingdom, suddenly tightened his reins and raised his warhorse's front hooves into the air as he shouted with his sword raised high. The German Empire's cavalrymen continued to charge past their lord and shouted, "Kneel and surrender, and you will be spared." The Kuruth soldiers, who were running around like headless flies, seemed to have found a life-saving straw. They immediately knelt on the ground and watched in horror as the enemy cavalrymen, covered in blood, swept past them. Clack, clack! Alonso rode his warhorse and slowly passed by the Kuruth soldiers who were kneeling on the ground. Finally, he let his warhorse's hooves step on the flag of Serene. He had won this battle. Moreover, he had won without any suspense. He had won with ease. He had the magic crystal cannons, so it was only natural that he would win. He lowered his head and looked at a Kuruth general who was also kneeling on the ground and looking up at him. He waited for him to speak first. Sure enough, the general took 2 steps forward on his knees and forced an awkward smile on his face. He begged, "I was wrong, on account of the fact that we were once vassals of the empire. Let me go. I'm willing to pay the ransom. I'm willing to pay 10,000 gold coins as long as you spare my life." Seeing Alonso remain silent, the terrified Serene looked up at the black-armored cavalrymen around him in a sorry state. The more he spoke, the more hysterical he became. "These are your last words?" Alonso looked down at the enemy commander who was curled up on the ground in front of him and asked coldly, "Tell that to the souls of the Blackstone Citadel. You can't kill me. I'm the lord of the Kuruth kingdom. If you kill me, Serene will hang you for sure. They won't let you go." The general looked at Alonso in despair as he raised his sword and shouted crazily. Uft. Alonso swung his arm, and the sword in his hand flew into the enemy's chest. The great force penetrated the armored body and nailed him to the ground. Seeing the black-armored cavalrymen who were covered in blood gathering around him, Alonso pulled on the reins and looked at the corpses on the ground. He slowly said, "You talk too much." On the other side, a general of the William family was already on horseback outside Larma Citadel. The troops he brought with him had bypassed Serukan's main forces and killed their way to Larma Citadel. "We have to take Larma as soon as possible. We don't know if our troops can hold on the battlefield, so we have to win here quickly." Riding on his warhorse, the general of the William family pointed at the walls of Larma Citadel with his horsewhip. "We didn't bring many men, so we can only rely on the magic crystal cannons to attack the city." The adjutant of the general of the William family, Korea, said with some concern, "I don't know if the magic crystal cannons we brought will do much damage to the walls. Order the soldiers to cook. Prepare the cannoneers to attack. After an hour of rest, immediately begin the attack." The general of the William family pulled on the reins of his warhorse and retreated back to his cavalry formation without looking back. "Send someone to persuade them to surrender. If they are willing to hand over Larma Citadel, Give them a chance to live. The general of the William family added another order after returning to his formation. Chapter 215. The adjutant casually picked 2 soldiers and had them bring the Empire's flag to Larma City to persuade the German Empire to surrender. The 2 soldiers trembled as they arrived outside the castle. They raised the flag and shouted at the Larma soldiers on the city walls, "Soldiers of Larma, listen up. You have no way out. Put down your weapons and surrender." Ha ha! On top of the city walls, the Larma soldiers held their weapons and pointed at the German Empire's cavalry. Their mocking laughter could be heard clearly even from below the city walls. "Soldiers of Larma, you have no choice. Put down your weapons and surrender. This is your last chance." Hearing the mocking laughter, the 2 cavalry soldiers felt their faces turn red. They had no choice but to muster their courage and shout at the city walls. Whoosh! An arrow hit the side of the German Empire's horse. The soldiers on the city walls gave them a warning. "Go back. Shout one more time and we'll shoot." A wise man knows better than a fight when the odds are against him. The 2 German Empire's cavalry soldiers looked at each other and immediately turned their horses around and galloped away. Behind them, the laughter of the Larma soldiers became even more unrestrained. Hearing the report from his subordinate, the general of the William family laughed coldly and continued to silently watch the artillery soldiers set up their positions a kilometer away. These large-caliber magic crystal cannons were definitely a killing machine. Wait a moment, those idiots won't be able to laugh anymore. Next to the general of the William family, his adjutant looked at the city walls and curled his lips to vent his anger. After 2 rounds of cannon fire, send people to persuade them to surrender. The general of the William family said coldly, "Let the cannons do the talking. It's better than us doing it." "Ha, you're right." The adjutant heard the words of the general of the William family and laughed. The general of the William family pulled on the reins. "Get the soldiers ready. Attack immediately." The adjutant nodded and urged his horse to follow the general of the William family. "Get ready for battle. Get ready for battle." Boom! After a short while, a large-caliber magic crystal cannon let out a roar, and a magic explosive shell smashed into the building behind the city wall, and the explosion sent half of the tower flying. The second magic bomb directly tore apart the flagpole of Larma City and sent the Larma flag flying. It also blew up a corner of an arrow tower behind the flag. The laughter stopped abruptly. All of Larma's soldiers looked at the explosion in horror, not knowing what to say. "They have a magician," a soldier screamed hysterically. Not far from him, the black smoke from the explosion was spreading, and the broken limbs around reminded him how terrible the explosion was. "Quick, quick, raise the white flag." The officer in charge of guarding the city was so frightened that he began to stutter. He pointed at the battlements in the distance and ordered loudly, "Go find the white bed sheets. Quick, we surrender." Now, for the people of Larma City, surrendering as soon as possible was the best choice to save their lives. Although they didn't know how the German Empire got a magician to fight for them, the explosion in front of them made them unable to muster up the courage to resist. Boom! Just as the people of Larma City were crying for their parents and looking for the white bed sheets, the second round of bombardment began. The cannonballs fell like raindrops, and in an instant, several flowers of fire bloomed near the city wall. The battlements were blown to pieces by the cannonballs, and the soldiers were sent flying into the air before falling down from the city wall in a mess. In the midst of the black smoke, the gates of Larma Castle slowly opened. On the city wall, a white flag made of 4 bed sheets fluttered in the wind. I thought they were tough. The adjutant, who was waiting outside the range of the archers and was ready to attack at any time, pulled on the reins and scolded with a look of disdain. "If they surrender early, I can save some cannonballs." The general of the William family stretched out his right hand and waved it forward. The cavalry behind him urged their horses forward and rushed into Larma Castle. The infantrymen of the German Empire pressed on the long swords at their waists, pushing aside the embarrassed Larma soldiers and walking up the stone steps of the city wall. The black flag of the German Empire, which had been prepared long ago, was spread out and spread on the outer walls of Larma Castle. The general of the William family stood on the city wall, looking at the gathered Larma soldiers, but there wasn't the slightest joy of victory on his face. Lead the cavalry and immediately return to the German Empire along the main road. He was worried that Alonso's command of the main battlefield would be in trouble, so after seizing Larma Castle, he immediately ordered his adjutant to send reinforcements. He knew that Alonso's soldiers were limited, and facing Larma's main forces was definitely going to be a difficult battle. If there were any mishaps on the main battlefield, then his chances of seizing Larma Castle would be greatly reduced. In the end, the adjutant ordered the cavalry to return to the Empire, take away all the civilians and food along the way, return to the port. These departing cavalrymen plundered and destroyed many villages outside of Larma. This bunch of demons, these damned demons. A woman hugging a child cried helplessly in the midst of the frantic crowd. The entire area outside Larma Castle was in chaos. Wherever the Empire's cavalry passed, it was a scene of tragedy. Although they were few in number, the Empire's cavalry still possessed great killing power against the civilians. The cavalry let out strange cries as they rode past the crowd, using their whips to call out to the civilians who wanted to escape. "Have some mercy. We've already lived here for a few decades. You can't force us to leave our homes." An old man knelt by the side of the road, crying and kowtowing, hoping that the Empire's soldiers would let his family go. Unfortunately, these soldiers who were in a hurry to split the spoils didn't take pity on this old man, only kicking him to the ground and letting him roll down the embankment unconscious. "Over there, there's a beautiful lady over there." At the entrance of the village, a few Empire's soldiers seemed to have discovered a new continent, loudly calling out to their companions. Inside the village, in a courtyard, a lady was desperately stuffing her son under the bed. "Don't come out. Don't come out. Don't move. Don't make any noise." The child looked at his mother with curious eyes. Then his line of sight was blocked by the bedsheet. A few seconds later, the sound of the courtyard door being kicked down was heard, followed by the hysterical screams of the lady. "Don't come over. Don't come over." Chapter 2:16. A soldier who seemed to be in a hurry to commit murder was ambushed and suffered a great loss. He let out a blood-curdling scream, followed by the sound of something breaking. The little boy waited until there was no more commotion outside before he dared to lift the sheets and crawl out of the bed. He then saw his mother lying on the ground in a disheveled state, staring at him with a pair of eyes. He crawled over and pushed his mother with all his might, but his mother did not move. He reached out and fiddled with his mother's hair before sitting down beside her, allowing the blood to spread and dye his pants red. The tragedy continued to spread in every corner of Lauma. Countless refugees who escaped the disaster rushed to Lauma Castle, only to find that the flag of the German Empire had been hung there. Alonso obtained a great victory in the battle at the German Empire's border. He gathered a large number of imperial soldiers and escorted thousands of enemy captives back to the German Empire. The main forces of Lauma were routed on the battlefield, allowing Alonso to take advantage of the situation. These adult male captives allowed him to increase the slave reserves of the Empire's Kelendal Colosseum, and could also be used as coolies or slave traders. At the same time, because of these captives, the troops of the German Empire did not encounter any resistance when they rushed into Lauma's territory. That afternoon, Alonso led his cavalry, and the cavalry led by his adjutant, who came back as reinforcements, reclaiming a large area of the border occupied by the Kuruth kingdom. 3 days later, a messenger returned from Lauma with good news for Alonso. The general of the William family had occupied Lauma, and now Saru Khan's main forces could only wander around, looking for an opportunity to retake Lauma. Because the difference in strength was too great, the border battle ended as quickly as it started. Lauma, the capital of the Kuruth kingdom, was reduced to ashes in the blink of an eye. Alonso quickly rushed to Lauma and met the general of the William family who had been waiting for a long time. The situation is very bad. Saru Khan's troops have also gathered elsewhere to prepare for a counterattack. They have the absolute advantage in numbers. The moment they met, the general of the William family reported a piece of bad news. Alonso had too few soldiers, which made it impossible for him to give up on Larma and chase after Saru Khan's main cavalry. If he wanted to launch a punitive expedition against Saru Khan's main forces, he would need to make ample preparations. Right now, the number of soldiers he could mobilize was very small. Relying on these people to attack Saru Khan's forces was too risky. Alonso continued to walk towards Saru Khan's tent in Larma City and sat down on his luxurious leather chair. Only then did he open his mouth to order, "Stabilize the civilians of Larma first." After thinking for a while, he continued to order, "Distribute the gold coins we brought. Let the citizens of Larma accept the fact that they are under our rule. Exempt them from some extra taxes." Taking over a place wasn't an easy task. He had to take care of every single detail. Put up a notice and tell everyone that we've captured a few thousand Larma soldiers. They'll serve in the mines for a year and will be released safely after that. Only by having the civilians of Larma accept his rule could he be considered to have won this war. The dead soldiers of Larma will be compensated with the money seized from Larma. After arranging the work of occupying Larma, he ordered the general of the William family, "Send people back to the German Empire and have them immediately present the facts to everyone. Share the fruits of victory with the Northland people." Alonso raised his first finger and began to explain his plan in detail. On one hand, after the war ends, we will immediately reduce the tariffs and give the benefits to other powers. Start to sell goods at a low price. If the situation is urgent, we will not hesitate to give them away for free. After saying that, he raised a second finger. Distribute the gold coins we have accumulated over the past few days to all the civilians who participated in the war. The German Empire and Larma must be treated equally. He then raised a third finger and continued. Exempt the German Empire from agricultural taxes for a year. Distribute agricultural subsidies. Calm the civilians down and tell everyone that the war is over. At this point, he remembered another matter and looked at the general of the William family. Reward all the soldiers of this war with 1 gold coin each. If you don't have enough money, wait for the people of the Colosseum to hand over the money and distribute it. Understood. The general of the William family was filled with the joy of victory. He clenched his right fist and nodded. "I will do it right away." In fact, there were still many things that Alonso had to deal with, such as the important issue of conscription. Now that he had occupied Larma, he naturally needed more troops to defend it. Currently, he was still in a passive state of being surrounded by enemies, so the number of troops he needed could not be reduced. Previously, he did not have enough soldiers. Now, he needed more people to defend his land. What a headache! Alonso sighed as he looked at Saru Khan's tent. He had already revealed his trump card. If he delayed a little longer, Saru Khan's main forces would be able to gather and retake their city. Alonso drew up a new battle plan. He wanted to gather all the soldiers that could be transferred from the German Empire and Larma and immediately attack Saru Khan, who had yet to gather. First, we need to gather our forces as quickly as possible, then use the fastest speed to find Saru Khan. Alonso drew up a basic battle plan. The German Empire had thousands of cavalry. These elite cavalry were very strong in battle and should be able to advance quickly. The general of the William family also felt that using cavalry to advance quickly was a very suitable tactic. This way, they could save a lot of food and indirectly increase the amount of supplies they had. Although there was no detailed battle plan, as the commander of the German Empire's army, the general of the William family still dutifully understood the situation of the surrounding forces. After listening to these reports, Alonso drew up a plan that seemed feasible. He ordered the general of the William family to lead the cavalry to quickly gather at the border and then wipe out the scattered forces of the Kurut kingdom. As long as the general of the William family could eliminate the scattered cavalry, they would be able to force the enemy to give up on the field battle and retreat to the nearby fortresses. Once they give up on the field battle, Alonso used his finger to point at a small cup that he placed at the back, which was a symbol of his side's magic crystal cannons. I will personally lead the main force and bring all 30 magic crystal cannons to approach them. Chapter 2:17. At this time, it should be around 2 days. Alonso pushed the cup to the side of Larma Castle and said to the general of House William, "Our army will gather here and directly attack the enemy's castle to end the battle." The general of House William nodded and promised with confidence, "Our cavalry can complete the mission. Launching a surprise attack and eliminating the enemy will not be a problem." Then he pointed at the empire on the map and said to Alonso, "We have magic crystal cannons. Capturing Seru Khan alive is also within our expectations. The problem now is, how can we stop Seru Khan from escaping with his defeated army?" The general of House William looked at the map and frowned. "Forget it." Alonso slammed the table and said with gritted teeth, "It doesn't matter if they escape or not. Seru Khan, I must beat him. This is not a matter of strategy, but a matter of morality. I don't care if they rob the people. If it was me, I would do the same. But harming the people is a sin. It is a sin that we must crusade against." He clenched his fist on the table and said with unwavering determination, "This subordinate understands." The general of House William heard Alonso's words, and his eyes lit up. He immediately clenched his right fist and pressed it against his chest and said loudly, "This subordinate will go gather the troops right away. The attack must be carried out, but how to carry it out would require careful planning. If the German Empire could not end the battle quickly, then the pressure would increase. The safety of the German Empire's main camp would not be guaranteed." Alonso didn't have a lot of troops at his disposal. Altogether, he only had around 30,000 men. Some of them were left behind in the German Empire as garrison troops and couldn't be moved easily. These garrison troops had low mobility, and the speed at which they gathered would slow down the attack of the main army. So, there is no difference whether they were moved or not. Among the remaining troops, there were still some who had to defend the recently conquered Larma city. Now that Larma had just been occupied, it might not even be safe to leave behind 10,000 men. Therefore, the only troops Alonso could mobilize were a few pitiful cavalry and cannoneers. He had to rely on these people to quickly end the battle with Seru Khan's main force. Otherwise, the other forces of the Kuruth kingdom might take the opportunity to launch a military attack against the German Empire. If someone really attacked the German Empire, then this battle would not be a great victory, but a complete defeat. It seemed impossible to end the battle quickly with inferior numbers, but Alonso had to do it. This is a risk. The general of House William looked at the map and finally said to Alonso, "If the enemy uses the most effective harassment tactic and scatter their troops to slow down our march, we will lose. If Seru Khan gathers his troops and fights us head-on with the magic crystal cannons, we will win." Alonso gave another possibility. Alonso was optimistic about this gamble. They have the advantage in numbers, and they don't know how strong our secret weapons are. Why don't they fight us? Lead the soldiers to maintain order in Larma City. I will personally lead the troops to find Seru Khan's main force. Alonso decided to end the battle quickly and lead the troops himself. The general of House William immediately stopped him. "My lord, stay in Larma City. I will lead the troops." It wasn't that Alonso didn't trust the general of House William, but he felt that it would be better if he led the troops himself. He waved his hand and said to the general of House William, "You guarding this place will also be a great merit. This time, we can't just rely on brute force to eliminate Seru Khan's main force. We will also need to make last-minute decisions. There are some decisions that you can't make, so I will go personally." Hearing Alonso's words, the general of House William understood the importance of this matter and nodded. "My lord, don't worry. I will definitely guard Larma City and make sure nothing goes wrong." With the general of House William guarding the rear, Alonso was at ease and led the troops out of Larma City. Alonso advanced very quickly with only his cavalry. The Imperial cavalry was like a whirlwind that blew through the plains of Larma City. He handed all of the supplies and 30 magic crystal cannons to an adjutant and led the cavalry eastward. It only took a day and a night to reach Saru Khan's camp. Seeing the sun rise in the east, Alonso narrowed his eyes. The sunlight was unfavorable for his attacks, but he couldn't wait any longer. Pass down my orders. Rest here. Gather the troops. Attack the enemy camp. Alonso ordered the guards beside him to rest. He then dismounted and found a clean place to sit down. Along the way, he saw all kinds of tragic scenes. The houses left behind by the abducted civilians were empty, and the ground was littered with corpses and clothes. After gulping down a few mouthfuls of cold water, Alonso felt refreshed. He stood up from the ground and mounted his horse. He pulled on the reins and pointed to the front, asking the soldiers, "Have you rested enough?" "Yes." Seeing their commander get on his horse, many of the cavalrymen also got back on their horses. They answered Alonso's question in a loud voice and waited for Alonso's new orders. "Follow me to kill the enemy." Alonso pulled on the reins and turned his horse around. It whinnied and charged towards the east. Kill the enemy. Behind him, countless cavalrymen raised their long lances and clamped their legs on the bellies of their horses. Their bright armor shone as they charged towards the direction of the rising sun. The sun had just risen, and a Kurut soldier was yawning lazily. These few days they were exhausted. They had been running for their lives. If they didn't find a chance to slack off, how could they face themselves? What's more, in a few days, they might attack Larma and take it back. At that time, it would be impossible to slack off. He covered his mouth with his hand and subconsciously glanced at the horizon that was still shrouded in darkness. Then, he couldn't help but frown. Squinting his eyes, the soldier saw something squirming on the horizon. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and carefully stared at the end of the road. This time, he was even more certain that there were cavalrymen approaching. Chapter 2:18. Hey, there's an enemy. He kicked his companion beside him with the tip of his foot, waking up another who had fallen asleep. The Empire's army is coming. Impossible. They're in Lauma right now. Where would the soldiers come from to bother us? It's already good enough that we didn't seek revenge on them. On the watchtower, another soldier was unwilling to open his eyes as he replied in a dreamy voice. "No, it's real cavalry." As the cavalry got closer and closer, the Kurut soldier who was awake became hysterical. He kept kicking his companion beside him and shouted loudly. Finally, the soldier couldn't take it anymore. He got up from the ground, held his weapon, and looked at the brightening horizon. He found that a group of cavalry was really galloping in their direction. In an instant, the soldier who just got up was also scared out of his wits. "Quick, go sound the alarm." Looking at the charging cavalry, the Imperial soldier anxiously ordered loudly. He could feel that the platform beneath his feet was shaking. He could also feel that his legs were trembling along with the tremors. Saru Khan quickly responded. A group of cavalry gathered, seemingly wanting to stop Alonso's advance. A group of grassland heavy cavalry stood in front of Alonso, blocking the path of Alonso's cavalry. He slightly reorganized his troops and immediately launched an attack. There were almost no infantrymen or crossbowmen. Together with the charging cavalry, they became a huge meat grinder. Alonso rode on his horse and charged into the enemy's phalanx under the escort of his guards. His long sword swung in an arc, cutting down an enemy cavalry who passed by from the side. The huge impact of the warhorse drove the sharp sword from the bottom to the top, tearing open the thin armor and the flesh inside. Before the enemy soldier screamed and fell, Alonso's warhorse had already rushed to the other two enemies. The German Empire cavalry behind Alonso slashed left and right as if there was no resistance. Their armor was splattered with blood, and in the eyes of the enemy, They looked like demons from hell. The cavalry that followed him formed a huge meat grinder, devouring the lives of the surrounding enemies. The Kurut cavalry that came to meet the enemy was a light cavalry led by a general under Saru Khan. In terms of defense, they were far inferior to the Empire's heavy cavalry. In just a breath's time, their formation cut a huge gap in the enemy's line of defense. Then, more cavalry poured into the gap, spreading like poison on the wound. After flicking away a spear that was thrusting towards him, Alonso used his backhand to break the shaft of the spear. Then, he took the opportunity to pierce the throat of the grassland light cavalryman who was holding the spear. He pulled out his long sword and continued to move forward. His lips were still slightly pale, his gaze as sharp as needles. His not very tall, but his well-proportioned body, moving through the blood mist with an indomitable spirit. A general wearing brown leather armor knocked on the thick door and shouted from outside. Disappointing! Inside the tent, Saru Khan pulled out his hand from the clothes of a woman and ordered in a cold voice, "Get in here. Speak." The woman didn't seem to be satisfied yet. Her slender arms hung around the king's neck as she coquettishly said, Khan, Khan Saru, who had already lost interest, kicked away the woman who was clinging to him. The numerous gold chains hanging from his body swayed gently in the candlelight, reflecting a soft and beautiful light. Khan, bad news. The Empire's army is coming, and they're all heavy cavalry. Our troops can't hold on for much longer. The general didn't dare to raise his head after entering the tent. Instead, he lowered his head and cried out. What? Hearing that his general had been defeated and that he had lost many soldiers, Saru Khan suddenly sat up straight from his leather chair. The anger on his face was chilling. I haven't even gone to attack Larma and take back our capital. Yet these despicable people of the Empire actually dared to come looking for us again. He slammed his hand on the table, emitting a crisp sound. You bunch of stupid pigs! What the hell are you doing? Yesterday, he was still immersed in the joy of being able to gather his troops and return to Larma. Today he heard such shocking news. He thought that the Empire would leave a small number of people in Larma, and the rest would return to the Empire. When the time came, he could launch a sneak attack in the middle of the night and retake Larma. According to the report of the soldiers who escaped, the Delman Empire's black-armored cavalry bypassed the scouts and suddenly appeared on our flank. Our light cavalry was caught off guard and could only fight back hastily. We were no match for the enemy at all, and our troops were scattered. The general reported the news he had just received awkwardly. Then what the hell are you doing here? Only telling me now? Saru Khan roared as he swept the cups and utensils in front of him to the ground. Khan, it's this subordinate's fault. The kneeling general swallowed his saliva and retracted his gaze from the snow-white beauty on the ground. He knelt down and begged for mercy. Saru Khan fell silent, and his attitude became much gentler. Immediately gather all the troops. We will fight to the death with them. Saru Khan glanced at the kneeling general and waved his hand to vent his anger on the woman. This bitch is yours. Khan. Hearing that she was thrown to such a crude general, the beauty on the ground turned pale. She screamed but didn't dare to move. Thank you, Khan. Thank you, Khan. The kneeling general hurriedly lowered his head and expressed his thanks with a wretched smile on his face. Just as the general was about to take the crying woman away, Saru Khan pulled out an exquisite scimitar and hacked the general to death. At the same time, the woman was also hacked to death by Saru Khan. A few female servants came forward and prepared a set of armor and hung it on his body. Soon, the muscular Saru Khan walked out of the tent, clad in leather armor. He had a long sword at his waist, making him look majestic and awe-inspiring. Alonso wiped the long sword in his hand and looked up at the main camp of Kurut at the foot of the hill in the distance. Beside him, war horses were snorting and eating grass with their heads lowered. On the hill in the distance, groups of Empire soldiers were surging along the road. From the time he set out until now, Alonso had annihilated at least 3,000 Kurut soldiers and captured over 1,000. Chapter 219. Alonso's losses were not small either. Many Imperial soldiers had fallen along the way. Because they did not carry magic crystal cannons, Alonso led the army to fight with real weapons. Sir, riding a tall horse, the adjutant in charge of leading the army pulled on his reins beside Alonso and reported loudly, "The magic crystal cannons have arrived." "Good. Let's take a break. We're about to fight to the death with the enemy." Alonso knew that he did not have the patience to drag this out. He had to end the battle immediately. As for that damn Serene Khan, he was not in the mood to pay attention to him. Even if the other party escaped this time, he would settle the score with Serene Khan in the future. Alonso's main magic crystal cannons had finally arrived. He personally supervised the magic crystal cannons as they set up their positions at the commanding heights. Soon, 30 cannons were lined up on the periphery, ready to fire. Let them see what a real war is. Alonso sat on his warhorse, watching Kurut's camp from a distance beyond the range of the bow and arrow. As his order was passed down, the cannons in the distance let out one muffled boom after another. Boom, boom. It was as if the earth was shaking. One magic explosive shell after another flew towards the target in the distance amidst the muffled sound of thunder, blooming like a demonic flower in Kurut's camp. Gravel spread with the shockwave of the explosion. Billowing smoke filled the air. It was a mess, and the earth trembled with the sound of the cannons. Alonso narrowed his eyes as he watched Kurut's soldiers flee in all directions. Some of them even ran away. It seems that their courage is nothing more than this. Alonso pressed the long sword at his waist and gave a low evaluation. He squeezed his horse's belly with his legs and led his troops forward slowly. "Everyone charge. I will personally supervise the battle. Succeed or die trying." Sitting on his warhorse, Serene Khan gritted his teeth and gave the order to counterattack. He saw with his own eyes that a soldier had half his head blown off, and his ears were ringing from the loud explosion. He could not hear the cries around him at all, which made him very angry. A low horn sounded, and all the Kurut cavalry charged toward Alonso's army. Soon after, the German Empire's magic crystal cannons began their counterattack. Their roars completely suppressed the cavalry's charge. The situation was basically one-sided without any suspense. Soon, the cavalry at the front was reduced to ashes under the enemy's cannonballs. That damned Imperial commander. If I can catch him, I will definitely tear him to pieces. Serene Khan, who already knew that he could not defeat the enemy, clenched his fists and cursed a certain person in the enemy's formation. Boom! A cannonball exploded among the soldiers, sending the armored Kurut soldiers flying into the air. There was a gap in the formation, and all the soldiers were at a loss because of this asymmetrical battle. They were never afraid of the rain of arrows flying towards them. They were not even afraid of being surrounded by enemies 10 times their number. But now, they were at least a degree away from the enemy, and they were already in such a sorry state. This made them feel terrified. Watching others fight and going up to try themselves were two completely different things. Even if they had seen the enemy's magic crystal cannons, when it was their turn to face the cannonballs, things were completely different. Continue forward. Seeing that the soldiers were beginning to panic again, Serene Khan drew his sword and loudly urged the troops to continue attacking. For Kurut, for Lalma, continue forward. Long live Serene Khan. Serene Khan's personal army roared. Braving the cannonballs, the 20,000 elite Kurut cavalry continued to charge towards the enemy. They stepped over the corpses of their comrades and charged towards the increasingly dense formation of the German Empire. Just like the previous battle at the border, the Kurut soldiers faced more than 30 magic crystal cannons, 10 more than the last time. It was as if they were being slaughtered. They suffered losses, but they could hardly cause any damage to the enemy. They were blown to pieces by the magic crystal cannons from a very long distance away. They died in vain without even seeing the enemy's appearance. If this continues, Serene Khan and the others will die sooner or later. There's no need for us to come all the way here. Gravel's confidant, Anna, pulled the reins of the Northland horse. She had rushed over from the kingdom of Northland after receiving Sarukagin's request for reinforcements. She buckled her helmet. Her heavy armor was one piece, and the patterns on it shone faintly. These armors were enchanted with magic and were very expensive protective gear. Whoosh! Behind her, all the Northland cavalry buckled their helmets. The white armor matched the Northland armor very well. It looked like a perfect piece of art. The cavalry's lances were pointed to the sky, just like a forest. As everyone buckled their helmets, Anna squeezed the ribs of her warhorse with her legs. The Northland horse, under her, began to slowly move forward. All the warhorses behind her began to move forward. The muffled sound of the horses' hooves hitting the ground was even louder than the sound of the war drums. The thump was like the beginning of a piece of music. It was breathtaking. The cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland has moved out. Reinforcements have arrived. An officer pulled the reins and stopped beside Sarukagin, who was already in a terrible state. He excitedly reported what he had just confirmed. They've gone around our left flank. They're crashing into the front line of the German Empire. We're saved. Sensing the sweat on his forehead dripping down, Sarukagin heaved a long sigh of relief. His body swayed, and he almost fell off his horse. But when he stabilized himself and broke free from his ecstasy, he shouted hysterically, "Continue the attack! Continue the attack! We're saved! What are we waiting for? Continue the attack!" Following his shout, everyone saw the warhorses appear on the battlefield. Everyone saw the white armor that didn't match the bloody battlefield. "They're here." Alonso could feel the uneasiness of his warhorse. He raised his eyebrows when he saw the unusual cavalry that had easily charged into the front line of the German Empire's army. The Northland Cavalry, Gravel's newly formed cavalry unit. "I heard that they're very strong." Marshal Alonso frowned. He was very worried that his front line of defense would be broken through by the fierce cavalry. On the front line of the battlefield, the German Empire's soldiers didn't panic when they saw the heavy cavalry. They turned their cannons and wanted to bombard the approaching enemy. Chapter 220. Then, the German Empire's magic crystal cannons fired at the Northland heavy cavalry, as usual. The battle had already begun. Whoosh! A crossbow bolt flew past Anna's face. That feeling really made her feel very uncomfortable. Before she launched the charge, she had simulated the situation she was going to face countless times in her mind. But when she really rushed in front of the German Empire's magic crystal cannons, she realized that she had underestimated her opponent. Hiss! The warhorse of a knight next to her let out a neigh, and then it fell down. Together with the knight behind it, they fell under the iron hooves of the Northland heavy cavalry behind them. The knight next to Anna didn't even have time to scream before his head was stepped on by the warhorse behind him. Then, more iron hooves trampled over his body and that of his warhorse. However, the number of knights who were knocked down was still a small number. After all, they were wearing heavy armor. After about 100 knights fell, they crashed into the defensive line of the German Empire's magic crystal cannons. As if to vent his anger, the Northland knight at the front picked up a German Empire crossbowman with his lance. Then, he swung his lance and impaled a second crossbowman who was not wearing armor. The other cavalryman behind him also knocked down all the soldiers of the German Empire in the blink of an eye. The scene on the battlefield suddenly changed. The one-sided massacre just had turned into a bloody battle between two sides. Kill! The heavy cavalry in the crowd was simply the most powerful killing machine. Wherever they passed, the soldiers of the German Empire all fell to the ground. The ground was full of blood and broken limbs. Bang! The soldiers of the German Empire were still carrying out their duties. They were still shooting at the Northland cavalry that had rushed into their square formation. Their crossbows were more lethal at close range, and they knocked down more Northland cavalry. However, because of a need to reload, these counterattacks were obviously not as effective as the cavalry's charge. More and more soldiers from the German Empire died. Three square formations formed by hundreds of crossbowmen were quickly ground to dust by the meat grinders formed by the Northland soldiers. Fight them to the death. Among the remaining soldiers, a soldier from the German Empire saw the Northland heavy cavalry charging towards them. He aimed the loaded magic crystal cannon at the cavalry and closed his eyes. Boom! Following the explosion, a burst of shockwaves formed around the Knight Norseland. The shockwave shattered the muscles of the Northland horses and pierced through the gaps in the armor of the knights. The knight, together with his war horse, fell sideways, and the fragments of the soldier's body fell beside him. Following this explosion, even more soldiers followed suit and fired the last shot. The entire defensive line exploded one after another. The combat strength of the German Empire soldiers was still very strong, and they were also very well trained. In the face of the enemy's attack, they showed unprecedented courage. However, because the area of the frontal attack was not large, the ones who really fought with the Northland cavalry were mostly the magic crystal cannons. Now that the magic crystal cannons were almost completely annihilated, the German Empire's first line of defense was completely penetrated by the Northland people. The Kingdom of Northland will win. Holding up the sword full of blood, Anna ignored the blood all over her body and shouted loudly, as if venting her anger. How many years has it been? How many years has it been since she had such a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction after defeating an army of the Empire? He almost couldn't remember clearly. However, defeating the army in front of her once again ignited her desire for victory and the excitement of charging and breaking through the enemy lines. This feeling made her excited, filled her with strength, and made her want to completely destroy the army in front of her. Kill. Leave no one alive. Gather the troops. Continue to attack. Turning her horse around, Anna ordered loudly to the cavalry following her. More and more cavalry gathered, crossing over the corpses on the ground and the fallen flag of the German Empire, and began to attack the Empire's troops. Now, the Northland cavalry was also in a killing frenzy, and they only wanted to tear apart all the people of the Empire opposite them. In the previous attack, they had lost a lot of excellent Northland cavalry, almost the same as the loss of the German Empire soldiers. This was absolutely unacceptable to the Kingdom of Northland, and, of course, they had to reduce their losses. On the hillside in the distance, Alonso was shocked by the attack of the Northland cavalry led by Anna. The moment these cavalry rushed into the defensive line of the magic crystal cannons, Alonso knew that this line of defense was finished. Then he turned around and ordered the officer behind him, "Let all the troops press forward, the rest of the crossbowmen to the front. Beat the enemy back." On the opposite side, the cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland had already begun their charge. This time, they were closer to the main force of the German Empire, only about a few hundred demeters away. As long as they rushed across this open plain, what awaited them would be a great victory. Attack! Following the order, the cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland began their charge again. They had just adjusted their speed, and then they rushed at the seemingly weak German Empire soldiers with the fastest speed. Fire! In the military formation of the German Empire, the officer of the Empire gave a cold order with an expressionless face. Following his order, the soldiers of the German Empire aimed their cold crossbows at the approaching targets. Tut-tut! Tut-tut! Without any hesitation, the crossbows let out a roar, and more arrows were fired at the heavy cavalry of the Kingdom of Northland. Countless arrows hit the armor of the heavy cavalry of the Northland, and dazzling sparks flew. It was as if they were facing a mountain. Alonso looked at the cavalry in the distance who were not afraid of the arrows at all, and his heart was filled with envy and admiration. If he had such a brave army, perhaps he would have fought his way back to the north long ago. Unfortunately, these expensive and powerful cavalry belonged to the enemy camp. This was really bad news, and it was really regrettable news. For Alonso, since he could not use them for his own use, he could only destroy them. Alonso thought for a moment, and then he commanded his troops to go forward to meet the enemy. On the other side, Khan Seru also led his troops to fight back, and it seemed that the situation of the Kingdom of Northland was very unfavorable. Chapter 221. Another heavy cavalryman from the Kingdom of Northland was shot down from his horse. When faced with the arrows, the Northland cavalryman, who seemed to be very strong, finally began to suffer casualties. Anna, who had already lost 100 cavalrymen, made a rough calculation. This time, she knew that she would lose at least 200 cavalrymen if she wanted to get close to the enemies who were constantly shooting at her. 2 arrows hit Anna almost at the same time. These arrows were deflected by the arc of the armor, but Anna felt the powerful force that shook her heart. She suppressed the uncomfortable feeling with great difficulty and whispered the thing that she wanted the most: victory. Go to hell. Almost at the same time, a surviving cannoneer from the German Empire aimed the magical crystal cannon that was originally used as a reserve at the Kingdom of Northland's heavy cavalrymen who were not far away. I hope you can withstand this. Northern barbarians. After cursing loudly, he opened fire. Then, the magical crystal cannon began its performance. Bang! The speed of the cannon did not seem to be very fast, and the sound of the cannon firing was not pleasant to the ears. All of a sudden, the battlefield became noisy. A cannonball hit the knight who was blocking its way and tore apart the pitiful creature who was in its way. Then, after breaking the neck of the cavalryman from the Kingdom of Northland, the cannonball broke the cavalryman's body. Then, it flew behind the cavalryman, smashed the armor of another soldier, and pierced through the cavalryman's chest. Then, with an unstoppable momentum, the cannonball continued to fly forward and drilled into the body of the third cavalryman, shattering his lungs. When the cavalryman spat out a mouthful of blood and fell from the back of his warhorse, a mist of blood had already spread around him. At this time, another cannonball killed its way into the crowd. It was also in an unstoppable state. The cavalryman's blood splattered on the face of another cavalryman, and the other cavalryman's arm fell into the arms of his comrade behind him. The new firepower began to reap the lives of countless Kingdom of Northland heavy cavalrymen. The Northland cavalrymen who were about to crash into the German Empire's camp fell one after another on their way forward. The battlefield had once again turned into a massacre, but this time it wasn't the heavy armored cavalrymen of the Kingdom of Northland who were slaughtering their opponents. Instead, it was the magical crystal cannons that were using even more terrifying shells. Crossbow. The crossbowman turned his head and shouted hysterically at his companion. The enemy was already in front of him. He had to seize every second to fire the crossbow. Beside him, several crossbow bolts were thrown at him. The archer once again aimed his loaded crossbow at the Kingdom of Northland's heavy cavalry, who had been battered by the cannon fire. Without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. His crossbow bolts rushed towards the enemy opposite him, leaving a bloody mist on the enemy's body. Anna felt her breathing becoming difficult. She saw the cavalrymen in front of her fall one by one, and the cavalrymen beside her were smashed into pieces in the rain of blood. Perhaps she had already suffered more than 200 casualties? Perhaps there were already 300 casualties? Anna didn't dare to look at how many cavalrymen were left. She only had one thought in her mind, and that was to rush into the enemy's camp as soon as possible. In the past, she wanted to rush into the enemy's camp because she wanted to win again and again. She wanted to win a great victory that could stimulate her nerves. But this time it was different. She wanted to rush into the enemy's camp because she knew that this was the only way she could survive. What a ridiculous cause and effect, but Anna found that she couldn't laugh at all. She didn't know when the enemy in front of her had become invincible. Those cowardly soldiers of the Empire had become as tall as giants at this moment. There seemed to be an invisible wall in her path. Those cavalrymen of the Kingdom of Northland who crashed into this wall would be smashed into pieces. No matter how brave and strong they would become weak and insignificant in front of this impassable wall. When was the last time I felt so powerless? Anna asked herself bitterly in her heart, but no one could give her an answer. for the kingdom of Northland. Forward! Using all her strength, Anna stood in the middle of the cavalry and shouted loudly to encourage the soldiers to move forward. This was probably the first time in many years that the kingdom of Northland's army was beaten so badly by the Empire's army. Long live the kingdom of Northland! As if roaring in their hearts, the cavalrymen of the kingdom of Northland cheered as if this was the only way they could muster up the courage to continue charging into the enemy's camp. It seems like we've won the battle. Alonso looked at Seru Khan's troops, who were once again beaten to a pulp. While he was speaking, almost half of Seru Khan's Kuruth cavalry had fallen on the battlefield. This was a fatal blow to the cavalrymen because the remaining troops were completely unable to continue the attack. The cavalrymen's formation was disrupted. They did not know how to face the corpses of their comrades and the countless amounts of blood. They had lost their fighting spirit and even the courage to continue charging forward. Some soldiers wanted to turn their horses around and retreat. Some wanted to stop and wait for orders. Some had been shot through, while others were helplessly following their generals to continue the charge. Anna wanted to stabilize her troops. She wanted to work harder towards victory. She rode on her Norland warhorse and kept moving closer to the enemy's camp. Closer, closer. Seeing that the target was almost within reach, she felt the warhorse under her suddenly lose its strength. Her whole body fell forward due to inertia. In front of her, the adjutant who had been protecting her fell to the ground with blood all over his body. The cannonball penetrated the adjutant's body and hit the Northland warhorse under Anna. Anna did not have time to think. The moment she fell to the ground, she rolled on the ground, threw away the broken lance, and pulled out the sword at her waist. She crashed into the body of the adjutant's warhorse and stood up unscathed. Then, she faced the soldiers of the German Empire who were close by and stepped forward. Her armor was dull, and she began to pant. After losing the support of the Northland warhorse, the heavy armor became a burden to Anna. Her steps were a little shaky, and her body was no longer agile. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.